And I'll open this
Depends on your point of view.
this meeting of the Planning Committee today, Tuesday, 2nd of May, here at Auckland Council. If you could please take your seats. Welcome to the councillors, Independent Māori Statutory Board Member Henare. Welcome to the public, our staff, media who might be here. Sitting beside me is Dean Kimpton, Chief Operating Officer. No Jim today. Jim's doing something else.
What are you doing, Jim? I tried my best.
Members, we've got some restrictions on the presentations today. We've got staff only available at certain times, so we're just going to have to time our way through the agenda. Particularly item 12 will have to be considered at sometime around about noon due to the unavailability of staff prior to that time, but I'm sure we'll work things through. I'll take apologies first, and I have apologies from Councillor Kathy Casey for absence, Councillor Al Philippina for absence, the Mayor Phil Goff for absence on council business, Councillor Sayers and Councillor Walker and Councillor Denise Lee. They are all for absence. Sorry, who's the one for early departure?
Councillor Walker's here.
Sorry, it's Councillor Wayne Walker for early departure.
He hasn't arrived yet, Mr. Chairman. How can he be departing early?
Well, he's already gone.
And
There's no apologies
Councillor
for lateness.
Hulse. You've got Councillor Hulse for lateness on council business. So I'll move those. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no, declare those carried. Members, are there any declarations to make at this stage on any item on the agenda before us? There being none, I will move past that. Welcome, Member Namani. Petitions, there are none, so we'll go straight to public input today. Oh, confirmation of minutes. I've missed that one, so I'll confirm the minutes, move confirmation of the minutes from the 28th. And I have a second in Councillor Linda Cooper. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Contrary no. Declare that carried. And now we'll move to public input. And I've had two requests for public input. I've accepted one, and that's from Mr. Matt Lowry from Greater Auckland on the Congestion Free Network Mark II. Come on up, Matt. And I think, is there anybody else with you, Matt? Or you? Just me. Okay. And also, just before Matt starts, I've recommended one request, and that was from Leroy Beckett from Generation Zero to speak on the importance and support for the linear park. That's the Victoria Street Linear Park. I've recommended to Leroy that he comes forward when that item is considered on the agenda, and we're thinking that's not too far away. And therefore he can be speaking to the business that's on our agenda, not in the absence of business on the agenda. So that's been taken up by Leroy Beckett, and he'll come at that time. And right now we've got Matt Lowry, and Matt, you've got a presentation, Greater Auckland's Congestion Free Network. In your hands.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for having us. We are Greater Auckland, formerly you may know us as Transport Blog. So all of us are here in this room because we want Auckland to be greater. We believe in Auckland and the potential for it to grow and become a much better city. So Auckland is becoming increasingly more diverse. We're becoming younger, we're more educated, and we're growing at a much faster rate than everyone else. And so it's important to remember that there's no going back to the Auckland of old. We must move forward. And the good thing is we've been doing a lot of really good stuff. We are improving particularly our transport system and public transport over the last decade or so, and we're seeing significant improvements and benefits as a result of that. I'm going to skip through some of these slides just in the interest of time, but I think the important point to remember is that we shouldn't underestimate the potential for Aucklanders to use public transport. We're showing time and time again, and particularly cycling as well, if we build it, people will use it, and people do want to use it. And so we've come a long way, but there's also a lot of challenges. Auckland is situated on a narrow isthmus, which we know is partly what draws us to this place and what makes it an interesting place, but at the same time it creates its own challenges. 4 years ago we presented our congestion-free network, our original one, to the council, and we're really pleased with how that's gone. We see a lot of it has been adopted within various plans, and going forward we see that continuing. But there's also been other developments too, such as ATAP. And our ATAP has been a really useful information, but it's not everything. It's not bold enough, it's not fast enough, and it doesn't really transform Auckland as fast as it should do. So one of the reasons for that is that it looks at public transport only as an option of last resort. It looks at it as what can we do only if it solves congestion rather than whether it's useful in its own right. And we think that there's opportunity there to improve and build upon that, be more aspirational, particularly as we're coming into the refreshed Auckland plan and other plans like that. So we decided it was time to rethink our congestion-free network, take into account the changes that have occurred over the last 4 years, to update it with all that information. We want to make sure that it has good connections across the entire city for all Aucklanders. We want to make sure that it's also affordable and it's something that's practical we could build within a realistic time frame. It's no use having a plan that's unaffordable that no one can ever build. So to start off with, we've got a series of rail networks. Now we've got the existing rail network, which will be enhanced obviously with the City Rail Link and further improvements, and we want to maximise that out to ensure that we're getting a really true metro system through there. But that alone is not going to be enough. All the reports are indicating that we need a lot more, and there's been a lot of discussion that's occurred around that. We want to build on that. We want to look at how we can get more buses out of the city centre, for example, and take, for example, the recent announcement around the city to the airport and extend it to the North Shore. We see reports that suggest that the busway is going to start facing congestion problems itself within 10 to 20 years, and so we need to think about how we can link that up. We also see the huge amount of growth that's occurring in the northwest, and that's about to occur, and how we need to serve that. So the busway is a good start, and that's obviously in the planning. But we think we need to go further, and we can link that together to create a really true good network with a good connections through the city centre, and obviously over to Takapuna. The blue line you can see there extends all the way to Orewa, and so we want to take that all the way there and serving all that development in the north as well. So that's a effectively 4-line rail network that is serving all of Auckland, or most of Auckland, but that's not enough, and we need to do more. We need to make it easier. We don't want everyone having to come through the city, because not everyone's going to come here, but we want to have those good cross-town services too. So we've got more on top of that. Now this is a series of, additional to that is busways, bus priority, to create a true high-level network. Now this is only the top of the network. There's obviously a lot more buses and ferries and other things below that, but we want to make sure we've got a good, strong core network that's going to grow, because that's what we're seeing is growing, particularly across Auckland. 50%, more than 50% of all the growth in the last decade on public transport has been on rapid transit. So we've got, for example, busways to the airport, upper harbour there, and some cross-town routes as well. So we think that would provide good connections and good fast connections across the city to do that. So we get a view of what the entire presentation is here, map is here, covering the entire region, and with good quality, high-level public transport that will serve everyone. Now, of course, the big question is how can we deliver it, and how much does it cost? So we have used the costings that are in ATAP and in various other documents to come up with some rough estimates. We appreciate they might not be perfect, but to give an idea, they account around about $14 billion over the next 2 decades. Which is about 60% of what we're planning to spend on CapEx over that time. So it's something that is completely feasible. We could build if we reprioritise our spending. It would mean making some tough choices as to what we build and when we build it, but it is entirely feasible. So there's a couple of things that we need to going forward. We realise that there's a lot of the pressure sits with the government. They are the ones that obviously have the biggest funding pool to use, but there are things that we believe the Auckland Council could do, particularly early on, to help encourage this and get a stronger network. This is particularly embedding that in a refreshed Auckland plan as a core component to really ensure that we've got there. We need to have that strong vision for what we want for Auckland, and we think ATAP doesn't go far enough, as I said before, to do that. So that's a very brief overview. We're happy to talk about more about this if you wish, and answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Members, questions of Matt, Councillor Newman?
Thank you, Matt. I think that was quite an interesting presentation. Do you have more information about the reprioritisation and what you're looking to delay or cancel in order to unlock funding to bring other items forward?
Yeah, I think there's a number of projects that we could look at moving, and we can give you some more detail if you like separately, without going through it, rattling off a list here. But it would require changing some projects, what we build. We think that there's a lot of opportunity to, particularly some of the NZTA projects, if we look as a more complete Auckland package rather than the council versus the government building program. So we think there needs to be more discussion around that aspect and reprioritising all transport spending, not just council spending and programs.
Can through you, Mr. Chair, can you, in slower time, furnish some more information about the reprioritisation? Because I think that's a perfectly reasonable discussion.
Yep. So, for example, projects like the East-West Link, that's currently up to $1.8 billion. We think that could be used better by some lower cost improvements to the area. We absolutely agree there needs to be improvements, but not necessarily to that extensive cost. And we could reprioritise some of that funding. Other projects such as Mill Road and other areas like that where development isn't occurring just yet, we can focus on getting these projects in place.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, thank you for your presentation. Anyone who's got ideas on a congested free Auckland is definitely worth listening to, because it's congested now. So my question to you is, what are you doing? There's two players in this game, from my thinking: central government and local government. Local government being both potentially members of this council in their direction to Auckland Transport, and Auckland Transport as a CCO. So my question to you is, what are you doing to talk to, one, the Auckland-based central government MPs and the Minister of Transport, and two, what are you doing about talking directly with Auckland Transport? Because this council has already updated its letter of expectation to Auckland Transport, and one of the things in there is just explain how you're going to deliver a work program that makes a congested free Auckland. So those two lobby groups, I think, are important. Yeah,
so we have talked to Auckland Transport already at some levels, and obviously we would love to have some more dialogue with them as well, and we will keep encouraging that. We have also reached out to members of Parliament from all parties to discuss this, and we will obviously continue to do so to encourage that. And obviously, particularly this year is going to be obviously interesting with what's going on with the election, but we will definitely be reaching out to everyone. I think the important point also to think about is that we're always going to have congestion at some point. We can't ever completely remove it, and it's not feasible to do so. But what we need to do is we need to make sure we're giving people options as to how they get around, and that's, I think, the key. What we're trying to say is, if we get these options to move around, we can then have more discussions around things like road pricing and other options that are out there.
And just a small supplementary, if I may. So you don't need any help from us with regards to discussions with Auckland Transport?
We would love, for example, for the council to put this in the refreshed Auckland plan as a key component that we want to see for Auckland. And obviously,
you didn't say that in your presentation.
Yeah, I did.
I did. Sorry.
Yeah, that was one of the next steps that we've got, is that we would like to see that embedded in the refreshed plan, so that it does become a document that Auckland Transport have to look at.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, Matt, thanks very much. I've actually got your vision stuck to my office wall, because I think it's got some very good points to it. Some others I disagree with strongly. So I'd be very interested, like Councillor Newman, seeing the more detail. But saying that ATAP was not aspirational, if I quite agree there, because it was based on the middle, and population was now well above high. So with your analysis, what level of expansion does ATAP need of quantity and quality, but also time frame to bring things further forward to meet that new population trend?
I think the key thing that we're trying to say here is that let's prioritise something that gives people options as to how they get around. And so, ATAP, as I said, it took the stance of only look at public transport where it solves congestion, rather than actually what can we do to improve mobility for Aucklanders. And that's where I think the key that we need to think about and change the perception. So, the funding levels are there here, are there in terms of what ATAP suggests, but what we're saying is let's change the priority of some of that. Let's bring some of these things forward and push some other things back to make sure that we've actually got this in place sooner, so that we can actually get some benefits from it.
Feedback is the way to go, isn't it?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look to have a one-on-one chat with you,
Yeah,
Matt,
absolutely.
some stage would be very worthwhile, please.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt, for the presentation. I'm interested in what you feel the council's role could be in trying to create a better platform for a cross-party Auckland caucus. It has disturbed me that we've regressed in that way. If I look back a few years ago, there was a cross-party Auckland caucus where members of Parliament, irrespective of what their politics were, would come together on certain projects. Do you see Auckland Council as being a player in terms of setting the framework for that?
I think that would probably be very useful. I think there is a lot of discussion that occurs. We've talked to parties, members of Parliament from both parties, and a lot of them get this. I think it's important to how we can bring that together and actually form a consensus, I guess. And so yes, I think that would be useful for the council to engage
play a
in
role
that.
in
Yeah.
facilitating those. Because I think, from my own experience, when you actually have everyone in the same room at the same time, receiving the same material, it's irresistible in terms of trying to get a consensus. It's just that much.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So you would see council, if it's acting responsibly, it would actually arrange those sort of briefings moving forward.
I don't see why the council couldn't do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. It's good to hear that you're actually looking at this, not just on how to get around or what we need, but actually how we're going to get people to where they actually need to go. And I mean, as you may know, in West Auckland and the Northwest, we've got the least jobs and the worst public transport. So do you think that those measures that you've proposed on that side of the region will actually address that, because we have more people having to move out of where they live to get jobs?
Absolutely. The rail line out to the west is fantastic, and I've used it this morning, for example. But it obviously doesn't serve that northwest area. So it's about giving people those options, and that would particularly growth, with the huge growth that's occurring in the northwest, would help serve that and serve it to where people are going, which is primarily towards the city centre or to the North Shore. And so that would definitely help.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Hills.
Once again, thanks, Matt, and thanks to the team. You guys have really sort of changed the conversations over the last few years, so it's been really exciting to see. I think obviously the next steps are pretty clear in there, but it is around changing the conversation. So when we talk congestion, I look at it more as your choice to jump on something that is congestion free. It might not mean your car is moving any freer. So I think it needs to be more around the movement of people somehow, because I think people still think in a different way. The other thing is that the discussion keeps coming up, especially on online forums and things, around the sort of heavy rail versus light rail kind of discussion. But do you want to maybe flesh out, in a simple way, why it needs to be sort of both, and what the point is you guys are going for here?
Yeah, I think the key thing there is that everything is on a spectrum. So yes, you could have dinky trams that are stuck in traffic on the road, or you can have there are many modern cities with modern urban rail systems that run on the street that have almost the same capacity as what the City Rail Link will have. And that, the key there is the implementation and how well Auckland Transport implement what they're proposing. So if they do it as I've suggested, absolutely it will have significant capacity and frequency and speed. But if it gets compromised by not wanting to remove for example, parking or other issues. So it's absolutely possible that we could have a very high quality system. It's just how we implement it is the key thing, rather than necessarily the focus on the mode.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Refreshing to hear your comments around obviously applying different priorities. As far as Auckland Transport's concerned, they've got this funnel, this screen that they use to evaluate projects. Does that need to be re-looked at in terms of mobility?
I would say yes. I think the issue of mobility is something that we don't discuss enough. We're talking about, as Councillor Hills was saying, we talk about congestion rather than necessarily how we get around. And it's easy to do that when you're stuck in a car and you're not moving very fast, and you're always wanting more capacity or more lanes, but that's not necessarily the best way of doing it. So yes, a more focus on mobility would be useful.
So if that process needs to be reworked, how do we go about doing that?
I think that's important for the council to push through as part of the Auckland plan as to what we want for our goals for the city, because those goals should then filter down through to Auckland Transport as to how they're prioritising projects. So it's key to get those goals there, and also in the long-term plan as well, as to how those goals filter through to Auckland Transport.
So I just put that to you, Mr. Chair, that is something that we need to identify.
And I think if you look at the recommendation, which I'll move shortly after questions, I think that will pick it up and we'll examine it there. Good point. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Matt. Great presentation, and
The calculator.
thank you for including Whangaparao in the network. We often don't make the cut, so that's nice to see. That network looks fantastic, and it's going out a couple of decades. In amongst all your other work, and I'm thinking particularly of the immediate future now, do you have any view on kind of interim solutions, given what we know is here now and coming even more so in the next few years, in terms of, and I'm thinking particularly in terms of public transport, low-cost improvements that build on success while this network hopefully gets rolled out? And I think of places like, for places where park and ride's a huge success, where ferry services have been a massive success, but which they're constrained and are looking more constrained going into the future. Do you have a view on those that are shorter term?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunities around that, and some of those have been taken up recently, is particularly around bus priority measures in places. So whether that be a bus lane, or even in cases just to buses being able to jump the intersection, so it's often just a short lane can do well to improve that. So thinking particularly towards the airport on State Highway 20B, I think there's some opportunities there that I know Auckland Transport and NZTA are looking at. We need to make sure those are done quickly to provide good quality options. The same thing I think in the northwest, and with the northwestern busway, we need to get some services there. We need to get some priority there, at least, so that buses aren't constantly stuck in traffic, and that will help both build patronage and usefulness of that network.
So, sorry, just follow up. Did your group welcome that sort of more finer detailed
Absolutely.
feedback? Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Matt, we get lots of presentations here, and there was even one carried in the Herald on the weekend about a stadium, some referred to as the Plug.
Aquarium.
And I guess I know that your organisation has got a lot of depth. I wonder if you might like just to explain, not by name, but sort of the roles and the skill that is actually sitting in behind Greater Auckland and its congestion-free network, just to give a sense of confidence to us or otherwise as to how you've arrived at this proposal.
Well, I think the key part is that many of the things that are on this network are what are already in council plans at some form or other. So, we've, as I mentioned, we launched the original congestion-free network. There are things in there that no one was talking about at the time, and that are now on plans. And I think the key thing is not so much whether we should build what we should build, but when we should build them. And that's, I think, the key message is we can bring them forward. And also, the secondary part to that is how we present it to the public. Council in particular and Auckland Transport have a tendency to draw a line, draw a project line on a map and focus on a project rather than thinking about the network. So what we're trying to do is bring together that experience of talking about how a network can work and how people can actually use it, because that's actually how you engage people, in our view, is to show them how it's going to work and how it can improve their life.
And key to my question is the range of experts that sit behind this work. Can you just give us a sense?
So we have a number of people involved with us. That includes planning experts, economists, and others. So we have a range of discussions, particularly focusing on transport, that we can rely on and get information from to help build that.
Okay, and you mentioned economists. Can you just go back to the slide where you compare the spend quantum between CFN2 and ATAP? Is that available there? It's quite a significant difference. You've done some good analysis of ATAP and your own CFN.
Yep.
Just want to get some confidence around that number.
So what we did is we've looked at the costings that we used in ATAP. So we've pulled out we've got all the information, pulled out the projects and looked at what was being built. As I said, most of these projects that we're proposing are already in the plan, so that they're already costed at some level to include as part of the ATAP work. And so we've pulled that out, we've grouped that together, and then we've also looked at what ATAP projects we will spend in CapEx over that first 2 decades, and that's what's driven that graph there. So, if some of the figures, they might be wrong, but they're coming from what is already in ATAP and other plans. So we're using that as a base rather than trying to make up our own costs of trying to make assumptions as to what they might be.
And you've got forecasts for the subsequent decade as well?
So what we've just said is, for the first, let's get this built. We need to get this built quickly. So that's, we would like to see it within 10 to 15 to 20 years. That's what would require to spend over that time to do that, and that's what the equivalent cost over that 20-year period is from according to ATAP.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. I'll put up the recommendation. Slight change there, acknowledging Matt rather than Harriet, who was going to present for Greater Auckland. Thank you, Matt. And members, I think it's good for our teams, both at Auckland Transport and our own Transport and Infrastructure Strategy team, to jointly have a look at this work closely and provide feedback to this committee. And I imagine that's probably through, Auckland Plan Refresh and other points where we might be considering this. So we'll get that analysis undertaken, and thank you, Matt. Do I have a second?
Yep.
Councillor Hills. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no, and declare that carried. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Members will, nothing further in public input. I've got local board input signalled from Chair Shane Henderson for item 12, and that will be presented at the item. And that's, at this stage, looking like noon. I'd like to acknowledge 2 chairs that are with us here observing today, and that's Harry Doig, Chair of Puketa Papa, and Chair Angela Dalton, Chair at Manuriwa. Welcome to you both. There are no extraordinary items. There are no notices of motion, which takes us to item 9, and that is the long-awaited sea change report. And I have staff here, and Dave Allen and Jacques Victor, coming to present on this. And members, I know the A3 at attachment A was a little bit blurred, my apology, but if you go to the hub and dial it up, you will see that it's a lot easier to read. We have some extra copies, Dave. I wonder if the Secretariat could just distribute those. Dave, while that's being undertaken, would you like to introduce? And you've got a short presentation, I understand.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, councillors. The intent today is to just provide you a brief overview of the Sea Change project following the initial evaluation of the Auckland Council group. And I've got about 10 slides here just to quickly run through. And this will sort of articulate kind of the next steps as well at the end in terms of what we envisage going forward on behalf of Auckland Council. Oops. Okay, so the purpose of the presentation is to give you a brief background, some of the summary of the main themes from the plan that's been produced, and some high-level observations from Auckland Council staff across the group. So that is not just council departments, but our CCOs. And in addition to that, I just indicated that we'll have a next step slide at the very end, which sort of just rounds off the presentation. So Sea Change, a marine spatial planning exercise, was conducted over the last 3 years. It was released publicly on the 6th of December. The plan is now available on the Sea Change project website. It's a non-statutory document. It's non-binding on agencies. The plan's vision as such is to ensure that the Hauraki Gulf is vibrant with life, it's Māori strong, productive and supporting healthy and prosperous communities. The agencies involved with the supporting the plan in terms of ensuring that it was developed over the last few years have been asked now to consider the plan and its recommendations. The plan structure consists of 4 main themes, and these are outlined in these circles on this diagram taken from the plan. They are effectively replenishing the food basket, a mountains to sea approach, a guardianship approach, prosperous communities, and these themes have within them a number of cross-cutting initiatives that contribute to these particular themes. And we'll talk about those initiatives. There's 5 initiatives in a minute. But to deliver on these themes, the plan actually proposes about 67 objectives, about 189 management actions, and about 67 research topics. So it's quite a big collection of information. And here's the 5 initiatives that the plan typically outlines. They focus on the initiative of fish stock and aquaculture initiative, biodiversity and habitat restoration, Gulf sediment and water quality, ahu moana, and kaitiakitanga and guardianship. And they're the 5 main initiatives that contribute to those big themes for the whole plan. Within each of those initiatives, there are a range of management actions and objectives, and some of the summarising of those is in that diagram there, and we've also summarised them in the paper itself that's provided. Some of the key messages in the plan is that the past and current actions to achieve that vision are not actually working, that there's an assertion that the plan must be adopted in its entirety as an integrated package. There is a need for a lot more information to support management decisions going forward, in particular as it relates to improving environmental, social and cultural outcomes. There is a clear direction that there needs to be some governance and management changes required, and in setting out the vision for the plan and the management objectives, the plan also recognises that treaty settlements and other related interests are not to be diminished or affected, and there's other processes for those to be resolved. Some very high-level observations were made by a group of about 20 different senior staff across the different departments and CCOs over the last couple of months. And prior to that, we held about 25 meetings with different department staff, including CCOs, and got their perspectives on the plan and its contents as it related to their particular activities. So the high-level observations include the fact that the Sea Change plan is quite comprehensive in terms of identifying options to improve the Hauraki Gulf. The plan does endorse a lot of actions that are already underway to improve the health of the Gulf. The recommendations made, though, don't necessarily reflect what is currently already happening or some of the statutory constraints as to why some things may not be happening. And then in reflecting on how the plan could be picked up by the different agencies in the context of local councils, for Auckland we've just gone through the unitary plan process, and so therefore we've sort of an opportunity has been lost in that sense in terms of actually picking up some of the aspects of the plan. But the good thing about the Auckland Unitary Plan is that it does address all the legacy issues that were around before that was put through. So it does provide us a good basis on which to compare going forward. The Waikato Regional Council is about to go through a number of statutory processes in its activities. One of those relates to the Healthy Waters package that they're advancing for the Waikato catchment, and separated off from that is the Hauraki Coromandel plan change number 2, which would be probably looking to be undertaken from 2018. So there's an opportunity for the sort of Firth of Thames in terms of some of the statutory considerations that Waikato will be looking at there. The other thing is that they're doing the coastal plan review next year, starting next year, so there'll be an opportunity there for some further public input next year and picking up some of the recommendations from the sea change plan and bringing them across into the public coastal plan review process. The other observation that a number of the departments and CCOs made is that there's quite a few drivers in terms of how the Auckland region or the Gulf region is managed. And one of those, as an example, is managing water quality in the context of growth. And there was a concern that some of those growth considerations weren't adequately taken on board in considering how some of the environmental outputs would be wanting to be addressed. So that's something that agency staff are particularly mindful of when we look at this, the range of management actions proposed. The proposals are not costed, and that's something that will need to happen, just to work out what sort of implications this will have for the various agencies or other parties involved. Some of the timeframes that are being proposed may need to shift a little bit. This might actually achieve more integrated and smarter, effective implementation, so that's actually a positive. And it might also better acknowledge some of the lead-in times required for some of the agencies and some of their work programs to adjust. So these are kind of significant considerations that perhaps weren't taken on board during the development phase. The other observation is that there's a range of different interests out in the community and as well as with the agencies themselves, and they've got a number of significant existing commitments and future implications of implementing the recommendations will have a number of implications, whether they are political, operational, or through treaty settlement implications as well. So there's quite a lot of factors to consider in looking at how the plan is picked up and rolled out. So for Auckland Council, some of the key aspects that we've identified that will relate to activities here are things like water quality, accessibility to the Gulf, biodiversity outcomes, governance issues, and aquaculture in the medium to longer term. As I indicated, there are some significant recommendations as it relates to governance and management change promoted. These are at a number of different levels, whether it's a formation of a new panel to consider blue design principles, for example, when looking at coastal infrastructure, or whether it might be something more about how the coastal zone is managed with the input of mana whenua and coastal communities, and that's something that's identified through the Ahu Moana initiative. As I've also indicated, there are some treaty settlements issues, and there are some suggestions around what the attributes might be for a new sort of Hauraki Gulf governance entity, which would help with coordinating some of the roles within, or picking up some of the sea change recommendations. I just wanted to give you an example of the kind of approach the departments and CCOs applied to evaluating the output of the plan. This is just as I said, there was quite a few recommendations that were put forward. This is just 3 objectives that related to water quality, and underneath those objectives there are a number of management actions proposed, and applying a traffic light type of system, staff were able to make an assessment as to whether or not something was achievable, practical, within their mandate, and or maybe needed something like a bit more refinement in terms of some of the ideas that have been put forward. So it was saying, well, actually, that's the tool that you might use to address a particular outcome, but it's not the only one. So there may be other ways to actually address the issue you're looking at. So in those cases, we might have said, well, that's okay. We can just highlight that as a yellow situation, whereby we'd be looking to recommend a whole range of complementary and integrated approaches to addressing particular outcomes. And then we had another category for red, which might have been not technically feasible or not practicable, or maybe very dependent on other things like change in legislation, which might be quite a driver. It's not to say that it would be permanently red, but it would need significant change in some way to actually make it more amenable to change and implementation. So just in terms of next steps, I have outlined that in the last, probably from January to March this year, the different departments and CEOs got together and talked about the plan and what it contained. We've brought this paper to you now as the first opportunity to give you an initial appraisal of the plan. And what we would like to do is for the Planning Committee to direct the council departments and CCOs to go back and actually develop up some work programs to actually look at how some of these options could be further explored. Some of them might be an enhancement on an existing activity. It might just need a bit of tweaking in terms of budgets or resource to apply to those activities. Some things may be completely new activities that will need to be identified in a proposed work program going forward. And some of those can be better, or there'll be a need for actually assessing what the costs will be associated with those particular initiatives. What are the synergies with other work, and what other factors may be applicable to actually progressing some of those activities. One of the other things is that while each agency has gone away and doing their own assessment in terms of their own particular activities, there is now the opportunity for us, having had that first 3 months to look at this plan, to actually start some of our cross-agency discussions, and obviously we'd be looking to work quite closely, particularly with Waikato, in terms of some of the initiatives that they have under the RMA and local government initiatives. What we're suggesting is that in the paper we've said within 6 months that we would come back to the Environment and Community Committee and provide, get the department leads to come back to the Environment and Community Committee and provide an idea of what the work program should be, what are the things that they've picked up that they can change within the existing activity, where are the new LTP bids that might be required to address some of these initiatives, and what other opportunities might there be to actually pick up some of these management actions. But so within 6 months, and what I've suggested is that just to keep the momentum going as we bring that back a little bit earlier in terms of coming back to the Environment and Community Committee with some sort of overview report to say this is roughly how the different departments and CCOs are responding to this committee's determination today, and looking to try and come back to the Environment and Community Committee by September this year, so it's about a 4-month time period. To actually just keep the momentum going, and recognising that a number of other agencies are going to be probably getting into that stage of development of work as well. So yeah, I think that's probably, all I'll say at this point in time, just to simply note that there has been quite a process to get to this point where we have facilitated a number of discussions across the council group, and there is quite a strong desire, I think, to actually identify feasible things in a sensible way and look to continue the momentum going forward to address the issues identified. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'll open it up for questions. Just before I go to members' questions, Dave, as I mentioned to you when we had a run through yesterday, one of the absences I see here is the role of the Hauraki Golf Forum, and I would be proposing a Roman 5 that we add the role of the Hauraki Golf Forum in supporting the recommendations of Sea Change. So I will add that to my recommendations when I put them up. And then there's also a second one. I appreciate this work coming. It was confirmed by the Sea Change Group in December. It seems a long time back, and it's taken a while to get to that stage. And doing that, I'd like to acknowledge former Councillor Penny Webster for her work in chairing it, and I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Mike Lee as being our other representative on that steering group. It's been an arduous journey, Dave. There's a lot of expectation. I think there's also a lot of expectation of Auckland Council. The other agencies, the other councils are looking towards us to lead off on this. We are the major contributor, or one of the major contributors, not discounting the value of all those other agencies, including mana whenua representatives. I'm of the view that, one, we do need to understand the role of the Hauraki Gulf Forum in supporting these sea change recommendations. I'm also of the view that we probably need to give greater impetus by establishing a political reference group or steering group, and I'll put those words up, to oversee the recommendations that we're possibly making today and the recommendations of sea change. So in the first instance, could you respond to me and to us on the proposal to reference the Hauraki Gulf Forum and establish a political reference group or steering group?
So maybe I'll just flick that around a little. Firstly, I'll identify that we have got this Roman B3 there, which talks about working with other agencies who share similar goals and responsibilities, and I think that's consistent with what Councillor Darby has just identified, is that we are on the same page in terms of wanting to work collaboratively across the board with those agencies, including the Hauraki Gulf Forum. One thing I'd note is that the Council Evaluation Group would probably, I think, welcome also perhaps the chairs of the Planning Committee and the Environment and Community Committee perhaps coming to their meeting and just articulate maybe the view of the Planning Committee in this case as to what the expectations might be going forward. And I was sort of thinking about this overnight, is that we're intending to bring that evaluation group together again, and that would be a useful contribution from the chairs of this council. But equally, the political steering group is an idea that's probably worth fostering with a broader range of councillors to take on some higher level issues that will inevitably occur. So.
Okay, look, I'll let the members ponder that before I put it up, but I would anticipate that maybe it is the chair and deputy chair of those two committees and a representative from the Independent Māori Statutory Board.
Yep.
Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chair, I can
Mr. Mayor.
support you on the idea of a political working party or reference, because I think that's probably a good oversight. Dave, thank you for this. It's complicated and complex. I read through the whole document quite some time ago, and there's lots in it that we can't directly affect. So where are we going to be working with MPI and DOC? So where are they at? And also looking at the Waikato Regional Council, their proposed 2 rivers, 2 waters issue may end up in Environment Court, likely. And there's another part that's not starting to 2018. So to get a sound result here, we need actually a coordinated front going forward. So how important is that sort of collaboration and timing, do you think, tied up with this?
I think, firstly, there's a number of initiatives that Auckland Council can take by itself. There's a lot of stuff to be sorted out within this region. Having said that, we are also identifying that we do want to work collaboratively with other agencies as much as possible. And in terms of implementing the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, there may be some crossover issues that we want to identify with Waikato, and they are clearly key issues affecting the Gulf in terms of both nutrients and sedimentation. So I think there is a need for us to work collaboratively with Waikato in the lead up to their plan change that they're proposing for next year, and also in terms of the regional coastal plan, in terms of some of the economic opportunities that might relate to aquaculture, for example. So that's the point there. The other one about the central government agencies was MPI and DOC have just apparently put advice to their ministers in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
And so they are kind of hinting that they are expecting to make some announcement soon. They haven't kind of given us a definite timeline, but I think the indication from them is that they are starting to take they are looking to sort of push ahead with things that are clearly their responsibility. So to me, that sort of starts to hint at things like fisheries management, marine protected area legislation, and possibly some governance issues, maybe the three things that they'll be probably highlighting as kind of issues that they wish to pursue. And I think then the question becomes, from a political steering group point of view, how does Auckland Council wish to engage in that discussion going forward?
Just a subsequent, Mr. Chair, one other thing, David, please correct me if I'm wrong, but recalling after reading the plan, there was a considerable lack of potential input from new age science. That stuff is coming out. You know, I was reading an article this morning that animals can have a collar put on them, and that is done by satellite to keep them out of waterways. So that's sort of all this new age stuff's coming through, new species to reduce animal emissions, less fertiliser inputs. So the document from memory did not mention that sort of science. Is there a place to bring some of this new fast-moving technologies into what we're doing in context of this plan?
Yes, the simple answer is yes, and they did actually identify in one of their chapters, right near the end, a sort of a discussion around research and innovation kind of areas and trying to get collaboration between Crown Research Institutes, universities, and whether that's for aquaculture purposes, whether that's for farming technology, whether it's for something else. They're actually hinting at some sort of hub of sort of innovation. So there is avenue for that kind of discussion and initiative in this plan.
My last point, Mr. Chair, would be to you, as far as the Hauraki Golf Forum's concerned, I think we need to understand exactly what that may be going to look like as well, and how it's going to be funded and so forth. And I guess that's a work with the government. But
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes, first of all, I'd just like to endorse the comments that you're making, Mr. Chair, around the Hauraki Golf Forum and the role that it can play, given that it's an existing agency with an act. The question I've got goes to B2, and that's particularly around prioritisation. And the concern that I would bring to the table is that right now, as a consequence of the unitary plan and various developments, we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tonnes of sediment going into sensitive coastal areas where there are marine reserves. So within what's proposed in B2, are we looking at immediate runs on the board where we can make a change now? Because my concern is that talk just tends to procrastinate. And the damage that is being done now is of an order of magnitude probably higher than what we've seen in Auckland for many, many years.
So
the question goes to prioritisation and runs on the board now.
So one of the issues with prioritisation relates to what information is currently available as a baseline to assess some of these issues. One of the suggestions in the plan is that there needs to be more baseline information available on how the sediment is actually tracking over time. It's quite a complicated thing to actually have those baseline calculations as to what level of sediment is actually turning up in particular catchments around the Gulf. So I think it is nonetheless, as the council has identified, it is obviously a very important issue that needs to be pushed through. We need to then ask ourselves, how does that relate to some of the expectations in the unitary plan? How are we taking on board that issue with structure planning? How are we taking on that sort of consideration in our research program? So there's actually quite a few initiatives that could be taken to address this issue. It's multi-pronged.
Correct. So
Yeah.
my related question, Mr. Chairman, is what work are you doing to identify those requirements? And they go to monitoring, enforcement. Critically, they go to resources and what we've got in our annual plan and our long-term plan to actually walk the talk and do the stuff. Because my understanding is right now we're too thin on the ground and we're not allocating sufficient resource to deal with these issues. So what work are you doing around providing us with some budgetary information for what we need to do?
So that's what we're intending to do for the next stage, for the next 3 months, is actually to start to get the departments and CCOs to actually look at what their existing programs are and actually saying, are they addressing some of the needs we have identified or that the plan has identified, and what can we put back to our councillors in terms of priorities that they wish to pursue.
And in respect of that, are we going to have a spectrum, not just a do little, but a do a lot more?
I think that's part of the option thing, is that if you want to achieve quite a lot, then we'll put up probably options that will show you a lot of effort required. So I think that comes back to kind of us going back to the CCOs and department heads and saying, let's look at a range of options so councillors have a choice as to what they might wish to pursue.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Mikely.
Yes, I'm happy with the officer's recommendations. With all due respect, Mr. Chair, I'm not happy with yours. I think you're jumping the gun here. First of all, there is some legal confusion about the Hauraki Golf Forum and a governance role. Hauraki Golf Forum is not a governing body. This is, you know, the Auckland Council has a governing body. The Hauraki Golf Forum is a forum, and its legal responsibilities are set out at length in the Act. And governance, a governing role in implementing sea change or anything else is not a part of it. So I would have to oppose that. Establishing a political reference group, again, is jumping the gun, because we're still going through a very deliberate a process of determining what is feasible for this council to carry out, budget for that, and so on, and at the same time looking at what the Crown is doing. So setting up an in-group, if you don't mind me saying, of the 2 chairs and deputy chairs and a member of the IMSB, to oversee stuff that we haven't even worked out yet what we're going to do. So there may be a place for a steering group at some stage, but the staff work needs to be done first, and it needs to be done in a very careful, deliberate way in coordination with other agencies, not Auckland jumping the gun. If we want to jump the gun, we should do something about the 2.8 million cubic metres of human sewage going into the Hauraki Gulf from Auckland. That's what we should be doing.
Have you got a question at all, Councillor Lee?
No, I'm just telling you that I'm opposed to your recommendations. I support the officer's recommendations.
Okay.
What do you suggest,
The
Mike?
C on the board is
Take them
actually
out.
not quite as I drafted it, and I just want to come back to that. But I'll take a question from Member Namani.
Kia ora. Just one question, because I think it's in the report, but I just need clarification. Within the 6-month evaluation process that council will advance on this, do you envisage engaging with mana whenua in any way, or is that post-decision?
What we've identified in the implementation section, I think, of the report is that there would be opportunity for us to go and involve mana whenua, but also other parties as well, like local boards. There are 2 different things, obviously, but I just want to just more broadly say that we think that there's an opportunity, given there's quite a focus on local initiatives, for us to look at how those local initiatives can be better identified and basically populating any proposals that come forward from CCOs and departments.
So as part of this within 6-month process?
Yep.
Okay. The other question is, we note that the IMSB, the treaty audit that they undertook in 2015 One of the outstanding actions from that relates to policy for mana whenua participation in natural resource management, and as a subset of that theme, co-governance, co-management is part of that, along with joint management agreements, transfer of power, other I suppose, tools or mechanisms. I understand it was due in June 2016. That deadline wasn't met. There was a revised deadline of December 2016. That wasn't met. And I think the point being made is, in order to, I suppose, evaluate some of those matters that might overlap that topic, in absence of an approved council policy on that, really does, I suppose, leave the door open on this and any other item that might come up, that council are really determining these matters on a case-by-case basis, rather than a strategic, considered view of their policy on co-governance and co-management. So I just wanted to note that, because I think that's an important component that's outstanding, been outstanding for a couple of years now, and that could well weave nicely into this process. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to your attention.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So just one more, it's kind of a statement, a question. In the Māori impact statement on paragraph 44, it makes reference to treaty claims related matters. I just think it's important to be very clear about this. While I know, as I understand, the primary issue generated around treaty was about commercial aquaculture and fisheries settlements in the Hauraki Gulf, and any potential changes in fishing arrangements in the Gulf and the impact that might have, that's not affected. So there was that. And I also note that harbour negotiations in the Hauraki Gulf have not commenced yet. And it kind of infers in 44 that they're underway or taking place. So the Crown has yet to initiate any harbours negotiations in relation to the Hauraki Gulf. It was just a matter of clarity.
Thank you again.
Correction.
Yep, thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Member Namani. Just in terms of a point you made earlier, Dave, about the... Just trying to find my note. Well, it's referred to on page, in the report, that sea change doesn't fully reflect the Auckland Council, unitary plan, etc. Originally, from memory, sea change was ideally going to inform the unitary plan, but it got delayed. Was that not the intent at the very earliest outset?
My understanding is that the timeframes were kind of known when this project was started, that there would be a unitary plan and there would be opportunity to inform the planning process, but obviously the timelines didn't all marry up in the end. I guess what we would be wanting to highlight is that there will no doubt be further opportunities for Auckland to take on board some of the recommendations in the sea change plan in that planning context when the time arrives. In some respects, I think having the legacy council issues resolved into a unitary plan is actually helpful, because now you've kind of got one menu to look at, and then you can sort of say, well, how do we look at the sea change recommendations and marry them across into the new context for how we are operating going forward. So I actually think, in some respects, it's not a bad thing that the sea change plan has come out after the unitary plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not you're not suggesting it is a negative that we don't align, and there is the potential to align, and the Waikato plan is probably more aligned because it's just it's come after, or their work has come after our unitary plan work.
Yes, and that's correct. And I guess I would just then highlight also that we would take the opportunity to work alongside Waikato to sort of look at some of the common themes that might apply across the two different regions, and such that if we were then going to have a plan change in the Auckland region at some later stage for a particular topic, we'd be well placed and stakeholders would be well placed to be informed about what might happen.
Thank you. I just want to note and acknowledge Jacques and your group for bringing forward from 6 months to 4 months, because there is a lot of interest in this for the very reasons I outlined earlier. And members, I'd just like to go through to the recommendations in red, if they'll be ready very soon. Are there any other questions that members might have?
Oh, sorry, just a quick one.
Councillor
We've got
Cooper.
the traffic light system here, which says red is not council's responsibility. Is this is relating, the report relate to this chart?
Yes.
But it says AET, which is a council organisation, so I'm just confused as to why it's red.
Sorry.
Because
Yep.
AET is a council organisation.
Sorry, it's probably more the fact that it's not so much about whether it's a council responsibility in that respect, but it's more about, in this particular one that they've identified, they're saying that they have got a number of other strategic documents that they feel needs to take sort of precedence in terms of how it's considered, how the issues are considered. So they're
Sorry, AET say that?
Yes.
Okay.
In this particular example, I think you're highlighting here, they're trying to say in this particular example that they have some legislative responsibilities under the regional public transport plan, so therefore they can't necessarily adjust their things unless those sorts of things are taken into account. So it's not so much the
That they aren't responsible, but that it's difficult for them to respond
It's difficult for them to respond,
statutorily.
yes,
Okay.
that's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Thanks. And this just follows on from some of the other questions asked by the council. And I'm looking at the plans initiatives, and in particular the Gulf Sediment and Water Quality Initiative, and that in both instances there is within Auckland Council's responsibilities. And I note that the slide went up talking about a sedimentation goal, as an example, out to 2050, like 30 odd years from henceforth. We do already have those sort of sediment and nutrient load limits for various catchment areas that exist now and that are monitored, because I on a reasonably frequent basis get complaints from people, particularly in areas like the Cura Long Bay Marine area, about these limits being breached. And I know Councillor Walker referred to the problem with enforcement or resource or whatever you like to call it. I just wonder, given this exists now, it's in our area of responsibility, how we in kind of good faith go forward with this kind of sort of bold plan when really on the face of it there's quite serious shortcomings in our own involvement now as it goes to one of these initiatives that we have nearly sole responsibility for.
And I think that's part of the gap analysis that we want to say. If there are some problems, we want to identify those and flush them out a little bit. The other comment I'd make, though, is that we have a national policy statement for freshwater management, and we have an implementation program that the council has endorsed. And one of the key things that's happening there is that 10 watershed plans are being developed, led by our Healthy Waters Department. And so that will give you an idea of current state, and then we'll be working on management scenarios that might flow, that will then be generated to sort of say, well, how do we see improvements in the current state if the current state is below national bottom lines? So there's work at a number of different levels, and I'm just highlighting that the NPSFM implementation program, which there'll be a council workshop on it in June, will identify at the catchment level kind of what are our goals that we're seeking to achieve. So I think there's, as you say, a lot of existing activity already. It's a case of now marrying that up. and actually better dovetailing sort of our compliance work, for example, with the management outcomes expected through a watershed plan, for example.
Thank you. So we'll just roll up the recommendations again, members, and thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jacques. So, as Dave told us, there are other agencies, but the Hauraki Golf Forum has a unique role. And I'm wanting to understand what that role is. And so we're asking here, Dave, Jacques' team will report back within 4 months to the Environment and Community Committee on that role. So we need it outlined. And at that time also reporting back on the terms of reference for the Sea Change Political Reference Group. Now, I'm open to what the makeup of that group might be, if there are members of the Hauraki Golf Forum here
Happy to put
or
my hand up.
others
It's too early, Wayne.
to put their hands up. Members, the reason why I'm suggesting it has a reference group is this is a really important body of work, and I want some political steer with the staff rather than just wait for the report to arrive. This is critical work. A lot of people are expecting us to lead out on this work. Now, I would hope that we can all buy into that and buy into the importance of it. There's a lot of eyes on this council at the moment, and as Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson and others have pointed out, we've been dragging the chain on sediment control. We've got a major issue just on sediment, let alone the other 4 or 5 key focus areas that Sea Change are mentioning. So I will move those recommendations. I'm happy to take any further queries or questions on the recommendations, but I will move them. Do I have a second?
So you've changed the reference to the Hauraki Golf Forum.
Yes, it's reporting back as to the Environment and
That's
Community
good.
Committee
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
on the role, and I have a second from the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Member Hanavi.
No, I was going to second it, but
Beat you to it.
Sorry, can I take the second? Can I take-
I'm easy, and I defer to my my elders.
Good. Oh, the elders. And so we're not determining the terms of reference here right now for the reference group. That comes back, and we consider that. We consider it actually at the Environment and Community Committee. Now, going to the membership, I don't want to jump the gun on the membership. I actually think the Deputy Chair of this committee is going to be quite committed.
Yep.
So I might, if you'd like to be on it, I'll put the Deputy Mayor in there in place of the Deputy Chair of the committee. Councillor Walker, you would like to participate? Are there others that would like to participate?
Have you spoken to your deputy and she doesn't want to be on it?
Look, I will, we can confirm that at another time, but I'm just mindful of an election cycle.
Yeah, I am too, but she still is your deputy.
Absolutely.
So I'm
Yeah.
just
I,
questioning.
well, I will keep her in there
Yeah.
and I'll bracket,
Ask it.
Yeah.
bracket. Let us work that one out.
Okay.
Councillor Simpson.
So just a question, probably if I may, to Councillor Lee, Mike Lee. Mike, you raised some points around timing and the legality, for want of a better word. Are you happier with the terms of reference, reference groups framework that's up there now?
Can I, through you, Mr Chair, respond to that?
Yes, you can,
Go
Mr.
ahead, Mike. No
Councillor.
one's listening.
I'm listening, Councillor.
The change made to the reference to the Hauraki Golf Forum is good. That's appropriate. It's taking away the idea of the Hauraki Golf
Governance.
Forum being a governing body, yet another one.
Yeah.
So that's fine, including nothing wrong with that. I do still believe, though, that the chair is in adding on these recommendations to what the officers have recommended, is being over-eager about this in order, wanting to get across it. There is staff work that needs to be done, and it's going to be reported back to us. And I'm just a little bit concerned about the process being ridden by a small group of people. I'm quite happy to have good advice without a political input come to us cleanly from the officers, and then we decide. I'm concerned about essentially interference at this stage. I'd rather have an objective officer's report, and there are other aspects that need to be added in. And I mentioned one clear issue that in 3 years the spatial plan people, the sea change people, didn't get much information on at all, and that is the chronic problems we have with sewage going into the harbour and Gulf.
400 swimming pools were...
Thank you. Are there other speakers on these motions? And Councillor Walker, have added your name. Are there others that would like to participate? Any Hauraki Gulf Forum members? I know you'd be most welcome. And look, just in closing, in a very brief right of reply, members, and I take Councillor Lee's words on. Yes, there is an eagerness, Councillor Lee, there's an eagerness to address some of the issues that have been raised through sea change. They are very serious issues that are facing the Hauraki Gulf, and I don't think we should be shying away. There does need to be stronger political leadership in this domain. It's been lacking for decades. And I don't point the finger at any party in the past, let alone the Hauraki Gulf Forum, that has operated under significant constraints through statute, but has done a very good job. But there are huge challenges in the Hauraki Gulf, and we cannot just wait for the staff report. It does need to be given some guidance. And I think if you look at the reference groups and steering groups that we have established on this council, they have all assisted us, every one of them. And if you look at an item just coming up on the urban development authorities, we've had a steering group, and it has done exceedingly good work in guiding the submission to government. We do it often, we do it for good reason, and we achieve good outcomes by having greater political oversight, not less political oversight. So I urge you to support the motions. And look, I will take your last call, Councillor Walker.
Just a question, and I'm picking up on the comments that Mike has made about reporting back to this committee. So will this political reference group effectively be working something up that comes back here, so that we've got transparency across what's going on?
It will ultimately, because most of this has been transferred now to the Environment and Community Committee, it will be reporting to the Environment and Community Committee. I will just check that with Mr. Kimpton. That's the intention.
So the way I wrote it, but it's very hard to communicate it all there, is that this initial membership would be available to provide advice over the next 4 months through to when the Environment and Community Committee would receive the report back, but the terms of reference and the actual membership for that long-term political reference group would be agreed at when the report comes to the Environment Community Committee at that time.
So I took my right of reply, but I will take the final question.
I just want to add value to the discussion. You know, there's been a lot of concerns about the role of the Hauraki Gulf Forum.
Councillor Lee, you've actually had 3 speaking to. This is your third speaking.
It's an issue that really concerns me.
Well,
I represent the Hauraki Gulf. I thought you'd given me the floor, but I'm not allowed to speak?
No, I will let you speak for the third time.
Look, I'm just trying to add value. You've mentioned the role of the Hauraki Gulf Forum, and you've done so appropriately with the amendment. Any discussion on sea change, the Hauraki Gulf raises the question of the role of the forum. And there have been reviews and concerns that the forum is not working as well as it could. There has been quite a lot of confusion about what the forum's role is. Not a lot of people actually read the Act, and the role of the forum is set out in statute. Now, it's essentially what it is. It's a clearinghouse, it's an exchange, it's a feedback mechanism, it's an interaction agency, and it's not being used to its best possible purpose. It seems strange to me, given that and the need to make the forum work better, that you're going to have another group, a political reference group relating to Hauraki Golf matters, not the members of the Hauraki Golf Forum. If you're really concerned about the role of the forum, you would ensure that the reference group was built around the Hauraki Golf Forum members. I believe it's a little early at this stage. I would much rather see staff work come back and then political engagement. But if you're going to have a political reference group, it seems to be rather absurd to set up yet another Hauraki Golf oversight body, not the political members of the Hauraki Golf Forum.
Thank you, and members.
Fair comment.
Did you not hear me invite the members of the Hauraki Golf Forum to put their hands up? So I'll put the motions, I'll put those together. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposite, noes.
You okay?
Declare that carried. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jacques. And thank you to the Secretariat, Mr. Kimpton, for supporting. We will now go to the next item. Item 10. And that's our submission that I've just referred to, actually, that Christina Kaiser's been working on to government on the Urban Development Authority's discussion document. Members, I'd like to open by acknowledging Christina. Christina, you've done sterling work here. At the outset, I was a very willing participant in just going down the journey of supporting the establishment of UDAs, but the more I've got into this as a member of this reference group that we established, and that reference group is myself and Councillor Lee, Councillor Hills, Councillor Filipaina, and we had also expression of interest from local boards, and local board member from Rodney, Phelan Puri, also participated. The more we got into it, the more complex it was. So, Christina, you have drafted with your cross-departmental team a very comprehensive submission. I just want to acknowledge your extremely thorough work in that regard and invite you to present your submission.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'll just thank you, Councillor Darby, so through the chair.
Welcome, Penny Pruitt, I should have mentioned.
And thank you, Penny, for being here as well. As you've just gotten a hint, this is a proposed response to the, excuse me, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's Urban Development Authority's discussion document. The proposals set out in the discussion document outline frameworks and mechanisms to undertake large-scale urban development and support urban regeneration. The government is proposing through this legislation enablement for local and central government, so to be clear, it could be either who lead urban development, to empower nationally or locally significant urban development projects to access more enabling development powers and land use rules, and establish new urban development authorities to support those projects where required, and powers which may include the ability to acquire parcels of land, to plan and fund infrastructure, to buy, sell, or lease land and buildings, and to override existing and proposed district plans through the preparation of development plan, or act, as the regulatory authority by granting planning consents. The ministry is proposing that the developments could include housing, commercial premises, associated infrastructure, and amenities, including parks, community spaces, or shopping centers. They could be in greenfield areas and parts of city expansion. The background of this is that the proposed legislation is the government's response to recommendations made by the Productivity Commission through the Using Land for Housing inquiry. And the proposals are part of the government's ongoing program to inform the urban development system overall. So that includes the Resource Legislation Amendment Act and the Productivity Commission's Better Urban Planning Inquiry. The government is intending the proposed legislation to be a toolkit to meet the ongoing needs of urban development, and it's intended to also complement government's Housing Infrastructure Fund and the recent National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity. Submissions to the ministry are due on 19 May, and Cabinet will decide mid this year whether to proceed with a bill. So in terms of our response, what we are asking for is approval on the draft submission. This is, again, as the chair said, a council family response, so it was developed working with colleagues across Auckland Council, also with Auckland Transport, Panuku Development, Auckland, and Water Care. We've also worked with the IMSB Secretariat to get their input, and the political reference group has provided staff with direction on this draft. There are more than 169 proposals in the discussion document. So what we've tried to do is respond with detail to the most substantive proposals in terms of how we've done our submission. We are suggesting that the council should support, in principle, the establishment of urban development authorities insofar as they provide for local aspirations and align with current and future plans, and that they take a collaborative approach to urban regeneration. We have Panuku, and we support the work that it does together with council. However, we have significant concerns regarding aspects of the overall proposals for the UDAs as drafted, and they include the composition and powers of the UDAs, the processes outlined for the development of a UDA, and the nature of new urban development that could arise if they're not sufficiently responsive to the current legislation, planning, environmental, and infrastructure context. So as proposed, we have some concerns about the tools, the processes, and interventions in the discussion document, really addressing the underlying constraints that presently hold urban development back. We also have some concerns that they're not well integrated with the government's wider package of reforms. And we recommend that the council does not support proposals that would allow strategic objectives of a UDA in a project area to override territorial authorities' strategic decision-making at the city and regional level. For Auckland, these proposals would conflict with the urban growth strategy contained in the Auckland Unitary Plan and the Auckland Plan. So, as set out, the proposals would create greater potential for out-of-sequence or ad hoc greenfield proposals to be brought forward. They are likely to reduce planning integration and override decisions made with communities and agreements with infrastructure providers. And we don't believe that they'll be as cost-effective and efficient as what may already be prioritized. We also have some concerns about how trunk infrastructure provision is being handled through the proposals. And we've recommended that infrastructure providers be part of the establishment project of the development project. We have also some concerns about funding and financing proposals. What they're proposing, we have the funding mechanisms already. There's a there's a proposal around territorial authority veto rights, and we strongly support this proposal. We think it's important to ensure that strategic objectives of the UDA are appropriate and don't undermine council's responsibilities. And we also recommend that council supports the urban focus of the UDAs. And finally, we suggest that council recommends that any powers over reserves have set parameters to ensure that any reserves that might be replaced are with equal or better quality open space. We've received some local board feedback. One piece is attached to the report, so that's from Puketapapa, and that's they don't agree with the proposed new legislation. They believe that there should be additional development powers, rather than those additional development powers, that they should focus on the Local Government Act and the Resource Management Act and what powers might be in there that can help support achieving better housing intensification. They also suggest that government should have a more purposeful agenda on affordable housing. I've also received some further feedback, some this morning, from Mangere, Otahuhu, Hawak Local Board, as well as the Oraki Local Board. There is some opposition to the proposed legislation, and there is support for ensuring that decisions that are made at the community level and some of our long-term decisions remain as they are. So those are the key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Questions for Christina on this topic, members?
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
You're happy to move? Thank you, Councillor Hills. Do I have a second? Thank you. Was that a second?
No, I want to ask a question.
Okay, I'll second then, and Councillor Quack's question.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the extensive report. Just a couple of questions that I have. In paragraph 28, there seems to be an acknowledgement there of the difficulty around brownfields development, and it talks about incentives may be required to encourage brownfields development in order to compensate for additional complications. What incentives would we have in mind? Or what incentives could be put out there?
I think it would be depend on the development at the time. So I don't know quite broadly if I could say specifically what the incentives, the specific incentives would need to be.
Mrs. Perrott, do you have any views on that?
Oh, I think that the real gist of that particular paragraph was about the view that we believe urban development agencies should focus more on brownfields, because that's where it is actually harder to get more housing up and running, where greenfields in themselves, the existing development industry are very well adept at developing greenfields. And I think the comment there about incentives was that if the government was looking at legislative change to encourage UDAs, perhaps they need to put their attention to what kind of incentive might encourage greater redevelopment in our brownfields.
And we would support incentives? What kind of incentives would we support?
Well, I think that there could be a range of those incentives, but as Christina has said, it would depend on the difference, what was the specifics of that particular UDA, because what is being proposed here is that for every area that might be developed by a UDA, there would be a different set of agreements between the Crown and the TA about what they could or could not do. But, you know, there could be planning incentives, there could be funding incentives, but we've left that open for government to think about further going forward.
Okay, thank you. Just one other further question around the compulsory acquisitions. And I'm just somewhat concerned about the amount of power that we may be handing over to the Minister of Lands in regards to compulsory acquisitions.
The powers that they're proposing would not, well, there are some concerns, and that's what we've outlined. The main issue is that for each UDA, there would be different powers. So it's a little bit difficult to say exactly how that would look. So it's quite dependent, but we do have some concerns about that.
We give qualified support to that?
So I think what we've said in our submission is that the proposal only gives the UDA the same powers of compulsory acquisition that exist with existing TAs. So you can either take the view that that power is too wide, or you could, and in some camps there is a view that the existing compulsory acquisition powers that TAs have are not sufficient if you want to move forward with amalgamation of land with it at speed. We haven't commented on that. All we've said is that the current powers that they're offering a UDA are exactly the same as a TA has, and in the case of Panuku, we can delegate, as the governing body can delegate to Panuku those powers. So it's not really addressing the issue that has existed for a long time, that the powers under the PWA, the Public Works Act, are actually quite they take a lot of time, because usually you start with an offer first, and if then the party doesn't agree, then you have to go through a process which can go to court over compulsory acquisition. If the intent of this discussion document is to have legislation that speeds up the process of amalgamating land, what is proposed in the paper will not do that. And that's why we've just raised that we're not really quite clear on what the problem definition is that this paper is trying to address. Is it the problem of speedily getting development happening and houses on the ground in urban areas, or is it just raising a tool that will enable a different type of urban development but will actually take 2 or 3 years to see something happening on the ground? And we need some clarity in what is trying to be achieved there.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
No question.
No questions? Are there further questions here, members?
Good question.
Mr Chair,
Councillor Hills?
thank you. Can I just really want to acknowledge alongside you this excellent piece of work. You know, on the face of it, we are keen to make development happen, but the points that we've made within the submission outline very clearly some of the issues that have not been well thought through in the preparation of this. And, you know, to be absolutely blunt, I think it reflects yet another attempt by the government to have a bit of a quick and dirty process rather than have a look at what we've got at the moment, the tools that are available at the moment that actually need to be supported and deployed sensibly. The biggest risk we've got with this is that we're required to set up a UDA pretty much for every development that happens, which adds hugely to the cost, the time and the complexity of development in Auckland. So thank you to your leadership on this, and I think we've got a good submission.
Thank you, members. So it's moved and seconded, and just a quick few words. Councillor Hills, you mentioned quick and dirty, but the Productivity Commission actually, you probably keep the dirty maybe, but the quick it's not really, because Productivity Commission came out with this recommendation in
2015.
15.
Yeah.
At best, it would be delivered by 19. So 4 years to deliver maybe more housing. That's the sort of challenge that we've got. And I think, you know, we've responded extremely well. This is, in some ways, primarily affects Auckland more than any other territorial authority. And whatever is ultimately delivered, we could possibly take best advantage of it. Though, as Christina and Penny have outlined, we do have those powers, a lot of those powers now, and maybe we could bestow those greater powers onto Panuku Development Auckland. But Christina and the team, and it includes Auckland Transport, Watercare, Panuku Development Auckland, have spent hundreds of hours responding at quite significant cost to this council, responding to a government discussion paper. And we should not underestimate what it costs to actually respond. It's several tens of thousands of dollars in the writing of this submission. I think there's a lot of potential in having an urban development authority in Auckland, not one, maybe more, and maybe that's the Hobsonville Land Company on behalf of government expanded, and maybe it's our own Panuku Development Auckland expanded with a greater remit and wider mandate. But I do have a lot of concerns about the erosion of public participation that is signalled in this discussion document. I don't think that's the direction communities want any governance group to go in at the moment. I think you've only got to look around the world and the revolt that's happening at the erosion of public participation. I think we should be strengthening it. It's something this council has been strengthening. I would be very disappointed if the government went down the track of weakening public participation. I'd be very disappointed if the government went down the track of marginalising territorial authorities like our own in making the decisions on whether a matter is publicly notified. That should sit with this territorial authority. So I support the recommendations here in having an urban focus and not a future urban focus for the reasons outlined by Penny Perrott and Christina. In some ways, I look at the roads of national significance direction, and I can see that this risks becoming a sort of a DOMS, developments of national significance direction, where there is a risk of railroading things through. And I think Christina's points overall have reinforced that that is not a good direction. I am encouraged to see increased Māori engagement and I guess that's because of those in the Parliament who have been representing Māori, but I reinforce the dramatically reduced wider public participation that's signalled in this. So a lot of potential if we can get this right and if government can get it right, but we've got a long way to go, and hopefully government listens to the many points that we are confirming here today. So it's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Just before we
Sorry,
go on,
speaking to it, Councillor Cracks.
I do see a bit of a contradiction here, that on one hand we do support more public consultation, more public input, more local input, and on the other hand, however, we do seem to be supporting compulsory acquisition. There seems to be a bit of a contradiction there. Just an observation.
Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Lee.
Just briefly, look, Mr Chairman, I think the officers have done a very good job in difficult circumstances. Essentially, though, I think this council should take a position on principle and on logic and say we oppose the idea. We already have the situation covered by and large with the Auckland Council family. It is meant to be a super city set up for critical mass purposes, and to set up another bureaucracy, regional bureaucracy, is just foolishness. I know which minister has pushed this, and I won't mention his name, but just think about it. I think that we need to follow the leadership of the Puki Tāpapa local board and just say no. It's crazy.
Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no.
No.
And declare that carried. Thank you.
Good comment, Mike.
Take a 5-minute recess, members. We have staff on the way for item 11. Just take a We're going to item 11, which is endorsement of the Global Street Design Guide, and welcome George Weeks. Good morning, George.
Morning, committee.
Come on up, and we'll just make sure we've got our quorum around the table.
Okay, I should have some slides.
You do. We've got them on the system here, and we're ready to go when you're ready to go, George.
Okay, fantastic. As soon as we have quorum, I should begin.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Okay, thank you, everybody. My name's George Weeks. I'm a principal urban designer at the Auckland Design Office, and I'm joined by my colleague from Auckland Transport, Principal Technical Specialist Chris Beasley. And the reason I'm here is that the City of Auckland has been invited to endorse a new Global Street Design Guide, and I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes or so just talking about this guide and how it relates to our own best practice and why we've been asked to endorse it. Now, this guide is one of a series of documents produced by or for an organisation called NACTO, which stands for the National Association of City Transportation Officials. It's an American organisation, internationally focused, and its mission is to build cities as places for people with safe, sustainable, equitable and accessible transportation choices that support a strong economy and a vibrant quality of life. And these here are examples of the kind of best practice they produce. And the international branch of NACTO is called the Global Designing Cities Initiative. This is headed by a New Zealander called Skye Duncan. And the Global Designing Cities Initiative recognises the critical role of streets in the urban environment and how they influence quality of life. And this has produced the Global Street Design Guide, this blue document here, which we have been invited to endorse. Now, this was published last year, and it sets a new global baseline for designing urban streets. I mean, as you can see from the figures yourself, it was a vast and international undertaking, drawing on best practice from around the world. 72 cities, 42 countries, 21 different street typologies, and 40 case studies. And significantly, of these 40 case studies from around the world, 3 of them are actually from Auckland. These are Elliott Street, Fort Street, and Angelico Street. I mean, increasingly, Auckland, we're showing the rest of the world how to do good streets. And we are writing our own book on the subject. Over the past couple of years, Auckland Council and Auckland Transport have been working together to produce best practice street design guidance based on the Global Street Design Guide, but localised for Auckland. So we have the Auckland Urban Street and Road Design Guide and our Roads and Streets Framework. So the fact that we've been asked to endorse the Global Street Design Guide is a reflection of the fact that it's very much consistent with our own forthcoming guidance. This relates to Auckland planning policy as well. This is just to talk about how the Auckland plan and its stipulations about considering movement and place for street design is reflected in our own transport design manual, i.e. this document here, which in turn relates back to the Global Street Design Guide. So it's very much inherent with our own guidance and also with our own planning policy as well.
Can you point to the other screen as well for the benefit of
Oh,
the
sure.
over here?
Okay, of course, yes. So we have planning policy relating to our Roads and Streets Framework, which sets out strategic configurations of streets, and then the Transport Design Manual being the document here, which is our local version of the Global Street Design Guide. And I mentioned earlier that it's about what we've done is that we've localised the principles to be appropriate for a New Zealand context. So let's just look at a few examples in more detail. I mean, here we have streets in a neighbourhood context. You can see there's a list of 21 different street types. This is from the Global Guide. Before you can talk about new streets, you need to understand what the streets in your city do. So this is the Global Guide, and this is the Auckland equivalent. As you can see, there are fewer street types, and then also this grid here is more reflective of the Auckland suburban street grid and the parks and natural features of our city. So we're taking the same principles, but we're localising it, simplifying it, making it appropriate for Auckland. And this also applies to the design of individual streets. This is what's called the public transport street from the Global Street Design Guide. As you can see, this is quite a busy street. We've got people walking, we've got cafe space, it's easy to cross, we've got food courts, we have trees providing shade and shelter. And also, as you can see, there's light rail vehicles, and unless you count the Motat tram, Auckland doesn't yet have any light rail. So the Auckland version...
Wynyard.
Oh, indeed. I stand corrected, thank you.
Better than nothing.
Yeah, in any case, the Auckland equivalent of in the Auckland design manual for the public transport street is this version here, which still has the tree planting, still has the wide pavements, but it very much is based on buses, because for the most public transport corridors in Auckland, they're going to be bus-based, and also there is space for general traffic as well, again reflecting the Auckland context. And also just small things like the fact we have canopies here, that reflects the Auckland typology and our climate. And just one final example is something called the neighbourhood connector. Again, this is the global version, and this street's doing lots of different jobs. It allows cars to move, buses to move, space to park a car, space to cycle, space to park a bicycle. There are shops, cafes, pubs, very easy to cross the road. There's trees that provide shade in hot weather and shelter in bad weather. But the question is, how do we make this more Auckland? Well, this is the Auckland version. So as you can see, the buildings are set back further from the road. This is very common outside the town centres in Auckland. The overall density is lower. Again, this reflects the Auckland context. People are driving and cycling on the correct side of the road. This, again, is correct with Auckland. But we still have the tree planting, the space to walk, the space to drive, the space to park, the space to cycle, the space to cross. So, once more, this is the kind of treatment which we see between the two documents, international precedent, localise for Auckland. So, to conclude, Auckland is increasingly one of the world's leading cities in street design. We need to be proud of this. And we've recognised that good streets, such as we see it here at Hobsonville, are essential for good neighbourhoods. A first-class city cannot succeed with second-rate streets. So by endorsing the Global Street Design Guide, Auckland will show that it is committed to delivering the highest quality urban realm while learning from and influencing international best practice. So thank you all for listening, and I do have a question from Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Councillor Newman, for posting that question earlier. It was a very good question. George, you've got a reply.
I do indeed.
George is just about to come to the question and the reply.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the question is, how does the design approach outlined in the guide, including the reallocation of road space towards public transport and active modes, paragraph 8, reconcile with existing streets that complement the predominant housing typology? This is particularly relevant in outer suburban communities where occupancy is based on highly capitalised single houses on a standalone section that will continue to require the use of private vehicles as the main form of transport. So that's the question. And the answer, okay, is that the Global Street Design Guide and the Auckland Transport Design Manual, they recognise that successful streets have to perform many functions. Streets have to be able to move cars and other types of vehicles like trucks and buses. Our streets need to allow people to travel by bicycle or on foot, and they need to address a whole series of place functions. And this is very much consistent with the Auckland plan. I can give you the paragraphs if you like, and also with the Mayor's letter of expectation to Auckland Transport, which specifically calls for reallocation of road space. Similarly, the unitary plan emphasises the need for streets to balance the role of movement for vehicles and place for people. And I mean, that said, I mean, urban design must always be informed by the local and regional context. In Auckland, the Roads and Streets Framework will provide the direction for balancing movement and place over 9 typologies, and the Transport Design Manual, which I've touched upon briefly today, will provide more detail. It doesn't dictate what you must do, it sets out what you can do. And the Roads and Streets Framework and the Transport Design Manual recognise that some roads and streets in Auckland may require private vehicles as the main form of transport. However, even if an area has a high car mode share, it's unlikely that this is the only function of a street, and its design will need to reflect all of the uses. And fundamentally, this is about increasing people's transport options. I mean, Auckland's a growing city. The Auckland Transport Alignment Project recognises that most growth in travel demand will need to be accommodated on the existing networks, and we need to be much smarter about how we use them. And by designing streets that favour walker, cycling and public transport, these modes will be more available to more people for many more journeys, giving the freedom of the city to everyone, not just those in cars, and making Auckland a better place to live. So I hope that addresses the question.
Thank you, George. It was a very good question. I hope it was a very good answer. Councillor Newman, were you satisfied with the answer? Do you have a supplementary?
I have more follow-ups. Am I in front of the queue, am I? Or?
You asked the first question, so I'll go straight to you.
Look, thank you for the report. I'm not necessarily sold on this, to be honest, but I don't want to be dog in a manger, but George, it seems to me this would be an easier guide to apply for a new community, much harder to apply in disrupting an existing community which is informed by long-standing patterns of design. I know that there is an attempt to try and improve PT, but in a road corridor, particularly in an outer suburban neighbourhood, that's going to be very, very hard. So is this primarily a document for new neighbourhoods, or are you greenfields, or where does this come in? And I might have another question after that.
I think I'd like to defer to my colleague Chris on this, because Chris has been involved with the Transport Design Manual in relation to the Global Street Design Guide and can comment with more expertise on it than me. So,
welcome, Chris. Chris is from
Welcome,
Auckland
Committee.
Transport.
Thank you. Right, so firstly, I would like to point out that on the 24th of May, we will be coming to a committee workshop on the Roads and Streets Framework and the Transport Design Manual, which will effectively give a lot more depth and detail to what we have done in terms of localising this international approach and fitting it to the Auckland context. And to answer the question, the provision of modal space and modal priorities in existing areas, the Roads and Streets will define how that is achieved based upon the local context, the wishes, the use, the future aspirations in terms of planning, zone changes, development. So if it's existing, if you're in an outer suburb area that is predominantly served by car now, unless the planning is likely to change, you would maybe not look to change it. What the design guides will try and do is that within the realms of those outcomes trying to seek, determine or assist the best way to accommodate the users that are proposed in that space. So if a street is not proposed to have public transport, you wouldn't try and accommodate them. If the majority mode share is car, they would be the priority most likely, but you would still be trying to make sure people can walk safely and effectively through the corridors.
Reserve the right to speak.
That's not what they're doing in Amity.
Reserve the right to speak.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Couple of questions. Obviously I haven't seen it, but I'm making the assumption that sustainable design principles around stormwater and the like are included in this approach.
Yep. Both the Global Street Design Guide has a significant chapter on what they term blue-green.
Okay, that'll do. And the other question is, sure, there's a need for our council to address urban streets, but then we've got a lot of rural streets. Are we working on that? And is there something comparable in that space that also meets international best practice and the blue-green and so on?
So that goes beyond what the Global Design Guide was produced for. That was very much produced around that urbanised centre. within Auckland Transport, the next guide off the rank, once we get these ones out, will be the Rural Roads and Street Design Guide.
Any timeline on that? Because there's some urgency around that.
I can't say completion yet, but it'll be starting. It's starting right now. We're starting to flesh out what the guide needs to contain, how it needs to work with the work that Auckland Transport and NZTA are doing in the rural areas.
Sure.
Work with it.
And just my context around that, Mr. Chair, the amount of pollutants that run off rural streets, lime wash, sediment is phenomenal. So it's a priority for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Hills.
I'm happy to speak to the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, just a question, again, from more of a suburban perspective. One of the relatively recent phenomena that I've noticed in my ward is that the huge increase of people actually parking on the street. So as a consequence of, flooding and cheap Japanese imports, etc., etc. So you now have quite out of the way places that aren't necessarily all that well served by public transport, but they have cars everywhere, and basically on a permanent basis. So once the people come there, it's overnight, and that aesthetically speaking, it's not pleasant, and certainly in terms of movement on bikes and even cars, the whole public element, even of the roadway, is compromised by this basically private taking up of public space. Does the design guide or you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, it does say how you may design streets. And how one does or does not accommodate parking is part of that. I mean, car parking can be accommodated successfully into a streetscape if it is thought about.
I guess I'm dealing with a situation where there's now a lot more people renting, there's a lot more car ownership, and I'm just speaking again from my own ward. That's really impacting on public streets, and I don't see a solution in that there's not room on the properties often, or there's other cars in there. So this is just a de facto utilisation of public space on a semi-permanent basis.
So, again, going back to the Global Design Guide, which I believe is what's being sought endorsement on, that really won't cover that sort of suburban context because it was never designed around that. However, what I'd like to say is if we can defer that question to the 24th of May workshop, because we'll deal with it then in terms of the Auckland-specific responses to how we'll approach it from a strategic position and then our own implementation, as I think it would best serve there.
Yep, fine, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I've got some questions, but probably more to you, Chris. First of all, I'm reading in the report that Auckland Transport is currently developing their design manual, which clearly and deliberately is based on the guide's principles. So in one hand, we're being asked to endorse the vision and principles of the design, but Auckland Transport are already, according to the absolute words, deliberately based on the guide's principles, right? I haven't finished my question. I go to the local board views, and you've already completed workshops with the local boards on that framework, and you've said that their feedback will be considered and changes made to the final document. I want to know what local boards have said that matches the principles, more importantly, what doesn't match the principles, and that's not in the report. So 2 questions. Why has Auckland Transport deliberately based their design manual on these guide principles? And 2, have the local boards in their feedback on how these would potentially apply to their communities, given any feedback which are contrary to the design principles?
So with local boards, they haven't given any feedback yet on the main documents. They'll be getting those shortly to actually go through in detail. So we've been presenting to them on the topics, giving them extracts from it for their consideration and discussion. But the full 300-400 page documents they haven't yet seen.
Right, nor have we.
No, you have not.
So this is just in principle. Okay, and the second question is, can you tell me a little bit about Sky Duncan? He's a New Zealander, I know, but does he have anything to do with Auckland? She. It's a she.
Do you know much about her?
Other than that, Sky Duncan.
Okay.
No.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I have to confess, Sky's actually a friend of mine, so I can tell you a little bit about Sky very briefly.
That's right. And my third,
she's very good at what she does. Works with extraordinary people like Michael Bloomberg, and she's set out to do this amazing work around the globe, which has extraordinary results.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
my
Councillor Hills.
last question, sorry. If we endorse A as written in the recommendation, and does that limit us from, if there are circumstances for whatever reason that actually are contrary to, does it let me start this again. Does it prohibit communities of making decisions that are against those design principles if there are extraordinary circumstances, whatever they may be?
No.
It's a guide.
We have, no.
Statutory document, isn't it? Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Mickley.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. I was very impressed. I was particularly interested in the slide that depicted an ideal urban street, in an urban street with a tram. And obviously, streets are multi-use, people live, work, shop, and also travel through them. And so all of that has to be taken into account. And it seems to me that apart from the technical superiority of light rail vehicles carrying masses of people quietly and powerfully with no emissions, there's also another factor relating to trams, and that is kind of an amenity factor that buses don't have. In Europe, you see trams going through medieval city squares past cathedrals, and it works, somehow works. I have not seen any academic papers on this aspect of light rail in inner cities, the city building amenity factor, something, you know, if you've got 300 people going on an electric tram through a city, you'd need about 7 or 8 buses to carry the same amount of people. The impact is totally different. But is there any work or papers on the amenity factor of light rail in a city environment?
I think we have to defer that because I don't know.
It's a kind of a given, isn't it? But I haven't seen it.
I'd imagine that there will be research produced by kind of Gold Coast, Sydney.
Because we're in transition. Yeah. You know, there's people are talking about trams and light rail. Government at this stage is not supporting it. We've gone off on a tangent talking about trams to the airport, but it's the inner city is where the game. That's where the trams would be so important. So eventually they will come, and I think we need to be factoring that in.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, I just want to take you back to your answer to Councillor Newman's question. And if I understood you correctly, when it comes to those suburban type streets where there is already a well-defined pattern of travel, you wouldn't be looking to change those. Is that, did I hear you correctly?
You may not.
Okay.
It's a very careful answer because you may choose strategically to change for various reasons, but then you may not. And it's only when you start looking at the use of those corridors, what the surrounding uses, where the destination origin points are, land use expectations, land use developments into the future, that you may look at it. Where I sit, I don't deal with that. That is what is done at the Roads and Streets, for Roads and Streets framework level, is sets those outcomes. And so, again, I'd probably say that better off talking about that on the 24th of May, where we can actually really dive into detail on those points and how that will work.
Right. Because I'm referring specifically, I guess, or I'm thinking specifically of Amity Stage 2, between the Pakuranga town centre and the Panmure railway station, where the proposal is to remove one lane of traffic, private motor vehicle traffic in each direction, and replace it with the bus lanes, walking and cycling. And while I've asked for evidence from Auckland Transport how that will ease congestion, they don't seem to have been very forthcoming with that. I wonder if you have any ideas around how that will ease removing half the traffic lanes in an area where currently only 2% of public transport is utilised. What are your views on removing private traffic lanes?
Without knowing the specifics of that project, what I would say is that productivity of a corridor is sometimes a key performance to look at, and what the future provisioning should be. That's probably about the limit of really where I would say, because I'm not an expert in strategic planning, I'm a designer, so okay. I would be saying things out of turn if I'd done that.
All right, okay, I understand your limitations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quacks. Just in terms of, we've had access to this document, but my understanding, and maybe correct me, I should pose it as a question. I understand it's the philanthropy of Michael Bloomberg's foundation which is sitting in behind funding all this. Is that correct?
Yes, it's funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies.
So by adopting it, at the moment you've got sort of some access to it, but would I be correct in saying by signing up to it then we've got a deeper access into the technical group that Michael Bloomberg's foundation supports at no cost to us?
I believe that is the case. Effectively, if you sign up and join as part of this NACTO global community, you get access to all their technical publications, their safety reports globally that you can then draw upon and utilise in your own research, your own framing of questions and responses.
And it's also worth mentioning, in addition to that, that Auckland is one of 70 member cities of the Global Designing Cities Initiative.
Thank you. Thanks, members. Do I have oh, sorry, I've got a further question. Member Hanare, and then the Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, fellows. Double-barreled question. In the global scheme of things, what's the Indigenous input into this sort of global design? And more in particular, in terms of New Zealand, what's the Māori input into urban design? In terms of what you're doing.
Well, I mean, the document that we're doing, the Auckland Transport Design Manual has been localised based upon global principles. I think in the report that was circulated, that there was a Maori statement in relation to how Maori engagement.
Yeah, I don't really want to know. I mean, I've seen it and read it, and I don't want to really know but that sort of what you're pointing me to is what I've already read. But what is the Māori design? What's the input? Because it doesn't really say. All it says is you basically talk to a couple of people and.
So, at the global level, NACTO probably. I don't know what NACTO is doing with Indigenous people. I'm not. It's written by a conglomerate of different nations, so that I would suspect it's probably fairly light, if not touching at all. For our work, we have been engaged with Mana Whenua through various workshops to try and emphasise and try and pick up on the key points that are important, so we can try and reflect them. We've also been bringing in the Tiranga principles into the guide itself to try and provide some guidance to reflect the cultural identities and cultural requirements for the project.
Just on that, while the global document doesn't reflect local context, like you say Auckland or wider New Zealand, let alone cultural context, the document that we're working on, that's the one, that's the subset that reflects the local, and it will reflect the cultural context. And there is clear intention, like we're looking at public buildings and Māori design principles and genuine inputs. Not
You
just
should be over there.
So the
And through the chair, I think
it will be reflected.
And we will take you through that in the workshop as well, where we'll show you either examples and or drafts of ensuring that we've got the Te Ranga design principles and others as part of our localising of the guide.
Cool. Should we be deferring this item?
Yeah, until the workshop's had.
No, I don't think there's a case to defer it. This is the high level document. We're at this stage enjoying the opportunity to access NACTO, but by signing up to it, we get an even deeper access into that organisation. And as Councillor Hills has witnessed with C40, this is at no cost to us. We're actually getting a tremendous resource. There are literally hundreds of technicians working on this, which we can get access to. I will go to the Deputy Mayor next.
Yeah, very quickly, Mr Chair. So I completely understand the international global context of this, and what Tao's referring to is what's the Kiwi-iwi version 2 of this, and that's what we're going to see on the 24th. Sadly, I'm not going to be here on the 24th, otherwise I'd have this question for you then. But where we have an influence from in greenfields, and I have to go for the people in the northwest and the south, where we're seeing what was once growing lands or grass paddocks being turned into urban to a greater or lesser degree, depending on where you're going. But the lands beyond that are still commercial, rural lands, and we are seeing in some cases streetscapes being created that don't allow for the movement of heavy traffic. And sometimes those heavy traffic is consistent. So I was very glad to hear about you talking on a regional context when these plans come through. But something very careful to bear in mind, that an urban design dropped into those sort of environments where there's not secondary alternative transport routes, and in some cases, some of these transport routes are being determined by Environment Court hearings. There needs to be some considerable thought put in that. We've had a couple of very bad case studies in the past couple of years.
Good points. Now, Deputy Mayor, you were going to move?
Oh, happy to move, Mr Chair.
Do I have a second? Councillor Hills, thank you. It's there for us all. Councillor Newman.
My concern about this is what happens is that a principles document like this is, of course, it becomes the stuff of design work, a manual that Auckland Transport will undertake, and all of that has to be consistent with our planning document, which is the unitary plan. And in the unitary plan, we've got regional policy statement provisions, objectives and policies, and just looking at B2.2, it sets out the quality compact urban form that enables the following, blah, blah, blah. 1D, improved and more effective public transport. So what tends to happen is that we have this rule book, and we have these design manuals that come in to inform all of that. And so that to me is how you start to contextualise these principles documents. The problem is that I represent an outer suburban community where it becomes a bit tough, because the nature of it is that these are highly capitalised neighbourhoods. You're not changing the urban form of those neighbourhoods in the next 5, 10, 20 years, maybe in generations. But of course, what we talk about with this sort of thing, Mr Chair, is future aspirations. Well, I'm talking about current communities where the car is still very, very important, because these neighbourhoods are quite dispersed with quite low density housing. I can understand this is a bit easier for high density housing. So, I mean, I'm not really that sold on it, but saying that, Mr Chair, this is hardly what you'd call, I mean, it's endorsing a vision and principles. It doesn't seem to be so unreasonable as to not support it, but I would be very interested to ensure that actually when it comes to future structure planning for greenfield sites, that we are ensuring that the very concerns that actually Bill Cashmore raised about balancing out the needs for multimodal access in the road corridor, that we are still reflecting the fact that we will need the means for private vehicles and commercial vehicles to have access through those corridors, because they remain the lifeblood of competitive enterprise, and they remain the primary means to move people around. So, you know, I mean, I'm not sure if that was at all useful, Mr Chair, but you know, I'm not really that hot on this, but it doesn't seem to be that something that's so urgent that it needs to be opposed. But I certainly hope that we'll be finding at this workshop that the application of it will be very much something that transport planners can use for new communities, but that we will not destroy access for private vehicles, because they remain significant.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hills?
Thank you. I am quite hot on this. And the reason why is I've seen some of this in action. Councillor Cooper and I both understand how this has worked out west, and having been part of the design of Hobsonville, it's now used as best practice. There was a lot of concern raised that ambulances, fire engines and delivery trucks wouldn't be able to get through. They absolutely can. I think the hierarchy of the road corridor remains, and the design is apportioned accordingly. So you wouldn't, have a narrow tree-lined street replacing Lincoln Road. However, a street like Lincoln Road, which is going to be redesigned utilising these guidelines, could transform an arterial route from a car drain into an economic generator and a life improver. And that's what this is about. So I cannot fathom why we wouldn't be wanting to access every part of the guidelines that are available to us. The bottom line around this is that it's forward focused, and it's looking at addressing the issues that Councillor Walker raised around stormwater, around our environmental principles, and even the issues that Councillor Quacks has raised about congestion and replacing lanes with multimodal opportunities. This is not a congestion solver. Congestion is with us in Auckland. It's how we manage it, and this says let's manage it by improving the experience daily on these corridors. Let's manage it by turning these road corridors into places that make sense for Aucklanders, and not every Aucklander, believe you me, wants to use their car every day. People are crying out for alternatives to cycle, to walk and to use public transport, and I think those of us who think that only cars are used are a decreasing demographic. So the bottom line with this is let's utilise this extraordinary opportunity. Let's utilise something that we have already done well in parts of the region, and let's see this rolled out throughout the entire region. Will it go rapidly redeveloping roads in our peri-urban areas? Of course not. Will it mean that an area like Lincoln Road that is slated for redevelopment will finally be done well with creativity and according to international best practice? Yes. Will it transform our city? Absolutely. And having just come from, and my apologies for being late, from a meeting of our collective sports organisations, we have an overwhelming endorsement from millions of sports users, millions meaning on a weekly basis, to improve the experience of the road corridor and provide alternatives to get walking, cycling, running and active. And I restate again, Mr Chair, this is our answer to doing that. If we can finally forward face rather than backward look.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Well put. Councillor Simpson, please.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, I suppose I feel that my knowledge on this would have been further enhanced by having the workshop first, I'll be straight up. To that end, I wondered if you would consider, as Deputy Mayor, as the mover, just noting in A that there may be exceptions to this. So that kind of gives us a little bit of flexibility for those potentially who are a little bit nervous, and I hear what Councillor Newman's saying, I heard what Councillor Quacks is saying, but I think in essence the overriding vision is out there, but there may be exceptions, and we don't know what they are, or case by case or whatever. It's not, I asked the questions directly, does it lock us in for everything? And the answer was no. So if you added that kind of noting at the end, maybe that keeps everybody happier.
Well, you do know that because you've had the answer,
So it's
and it's a
principles.
recorded answer. We need to note it, members, because I think we're hearing the answer, and then you're noting it. And really, we need to resolve rather than note. That would be my view.
Well, your B is a note anyway.
Yeah, well, that's just reminding us that we've got that workshop coming up. You okay, Councillor Simpson?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. Having listened to everybody's concerns and praises, you have to endorse this. It's a guide. It's not a statutory document, but it gives the local boards which we've been reassured when you're doing local planning, local streets, that the local boards will have another tool to look at and contemplate and see whether there's parts of that really work for their communities. And I think maybe apart from Councillor Newman, you know, some of us who've been speaking, you know, having quite concerns around this, have probably all grown up in similar time eras. And my grandfather's just moved out of his house in Balmoral Road after living there for 70 years. And so I spent a lot of time in Balmoral in that shopping centre as a young girl. And what I've noticed about it is the quality has decreased. This is about quality of life. It's not. It's about getting around, but it's actually about quality of life in communities. And I think that the quality of life then, when there were less cars, was actually, you know, as a young child, 6 and 7, I could be walking around there quite happily and safely. You know, you wouldn't let a kid of that age do that now. And I think this is what it will bring us back a little bit. You know, we're driving our kids everywhere, even to school when they live locally. You know, this is just crazy sort of stuff. So I think for me, this is another set of, you know, it's a bit like having the catalogue, you know, but it all is comprehensive. And if AT are already adopting these things, that makes, you know, real sense. And you've seen that even in communities where they're car dominated, which is one in which I live. We do have a ferry, but we have no other relevant public transport. There are a lot of cars, and we're getting those effects, as Councillor Watson talks about, where everybody's kid's got a car and they're all parked on the streets. But the reality is, if we can retrofit communities to make the parking a bit better for the people that we're getting public transport there and we're making it pleasant. We've seen at Hobsonville, people were all worried about, intensifying and not having enough car parks, but actually people are falling over themselves to live there and loving it. Loving the opportunity to walk freely. They've got dedicated cycleways, bus lanes in all the right places, and people love it. You know, and I think that's what we've got to look at. So for me, this is really important to adopt, because it just gives us more ideas, and if we can look at other countries and modify that for us, that's great. I don't think there's anything to be afraid of, because there's no compulsion in this.
Yeah,
it's just a guide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Hills.
Yeah, I thank you, Chair. I want to support this. I think that there isn't anything to be afraid of. This is the way we have to go. This is not, you know, this is not a choice anymore. We don't have any more land to keep bowling houses, to widen roads. I mean, I get depressed looking at roads where people have had extreme widening and now their houses are smack bang and their neighbours are miles across the street and they can never walk across, and they literally feels like there's a motorway sitting outside their house on lots of, you know, Lincoln Road for one, other places. We have to think of different ways to design spaces, and a lot of the time that is roads, whether it's walking, cycling, public transport or cars. Roads are the places where we spend a lot of our time. So if we don't design them well and let people feel proud of where they live or where they drive or where they walk around, and it's not safe, as Councillor Cooper said, for kids to just run down to the dairy quickly or walk to school because the design is not there, and we only design it for cars, then we actually start ruining communities, locking everyone back behind 2-metre fences because it's unsafe to let their kids even near the road. And you do go to the best practice places like Hobsonville, and you can walk around there and feel like you're in a park even though it's a street and there's trees around, and it's little walkways between houses and all that sorts of thing. And lots of people don't like the idea of Hobsonville until they go there and walk around and have a look how good the playgrounds connect with the cafe and all that sort of thing. And it's happening all over the world. You look at Paris, they're removing lanes of road from around the river there, and they're putting back boulevards and putting back people. You know, High Street here, I cannot walk up High Street anymore because you are just swallowed by parked cars. So I'd rather go on all the new spaces that we've added in the last 6 or 7 years that are walkable, that are friendly, that people are sitting, waiting, spending money, eating ice creams, having coffees, whatever. It's a way we have to move forward. Like I said the other day, Oniwa Road, you're adding a lot more people down Oniwa Road, but not because we've added more space for cars, it's because we've made sure that the T3 lane is free running, so you're adding a whole lot more buses. We've got shared spaces on the walkways now, so you've got more people using that space ever before, and more people running freely in a congestion-free way. So I get it that, you know, we're going to have to give up some things, but we need these type of manuals and overseas examples of good way you retrofit streets and good ways to upgrade greenfield areas as well as brownfield. So, you know, it's happening in our community, Northcote and Takapuna. There's going to be big Panuku upgrades there, and we need this sort of expertise to make sure we're getting the best practice models that bring communities back together instead of just dividing everyone by car. So I think it's exciting. It doesn't tie us into anything, and local boards are all going to have a say on their local communities, but I think this is a step in the right direction, especially to get that expertise from right across the world. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo the concerns that have been expressed by Councillor Watson and also by Councillor Newman, and in regards to some of the issues that arose in the early 2000s when I think Councillor Newman was on the Manukau City Council at the time. Some of the issues that arose at the time with the very narrow street corridors that we had around the Dannemora area. And we received a presentation from the fire chief, a Manukau fire chief, said, "Councillor, we've got a problem here. We've got a problem because if you have a fire on one of these streets, we can't get through. We're putting people's lives at danger by the very fact that we can't get to an emergency." So we then gave permission for the Director of Transport at the time to instigate a whole bunch of no parking areas up those streets. And then what people did, of course, was park on the grass berm. And in the grass berm, that's where all our underground utilities were. And so all of a sudden, we resolved one problem and created another. So as long as we are and continue to be a car-dominated society for our travel, you need to think of how the world really revolves, how it really is, not how you wish it to be. And I sometimes think that a lot of these things are how we wish things would be, rather how they are. And we found out in Manukau that things were quite different than what the plans had been in Dannemora with the very narrow road corridors. We found that actually it didn't work that well. We had problems, we put people's lives at risk because of the fact that fire trucks couldn't get through, ambulances couldn't get through, rubbish trucks couldn't get through. And then all of a sudden we found people parking on the road berms and degrading the underground utilities. So it's not quite as rosy as it all sounds. It's wonderful, and I think in the city here, in the inner city, it's been shown that it does have some merit. But in those suburban areas that I represent, Councillor Stewart represents, and Councillor Newman represent, and a lot of us represent those suburban areas, it actually doesn't work particularly well.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I think we've had a good thrash of this. Just speaking briefly, and thanks for those that are supporting this. Look, I want to acknowledge Michael Bloomberg and his foundation for supporting this work. We wouldn't be sitting around having this discussion if it wasn't for the generosity of the former Mayor of New York. And I know sitting in behind this work is Jeanette Siddiq-Khan, his former Transport Director, who some of us know quite well, and who has made significant contributions on at least 2 or 3 trips here to Elliott Street and to Fort Street and the others that are within the document and featured there. It would, subject to the vote today, I think, George and Chris, it would be really quite lovely for the Mayor to write to Michael Bloomberg acknowledging the vote today, in anticipation, of course.
Look, I love this work. This is the direction that we must take. As Councillor Hills says, there is no treading water status quo. The status quo does not get you very far when you are developing a city at the pace that we're developing. You cannot rely on the old tools in just about any area, and particularly in the transport area. We cannot rely on the old templates. They don't sustain us and will not sustain us. And this does, I think there's some, was it 21 street typologies that are offered, and that's just the baseline. And then you start to reflect, you go locally, and you reflect locally, and you reflect local culture locally as well, as Member Hinare just pointed out. So, you know, this is, I was, some references to South Auckland here. We have one of the most car-dependent parts of Auckland in South Auckland. That's why we rolled out the new bus network there first, because we know, the analysis says, that's where the greatest car dependency is. It was rammed home to me a few years ago, and I always remember it, still in my mind, in my vehicle, on Great South Road, on the arterial there, and taking into account its slip lanes at this particular junction, which is just north of Ronwood Avenue, and I think I counted 9 lanes, a very fragile small man had pushed the button to cross. He got his call, he started to walk. The signal changed and he still had 2 lanes to go, and the horns were going. And this poor little man was just caught in the middle of nowhere with 2 lanes to go, and he struggled those last 2 lanes being blasted by motorists. And that is what you get when you put cars first eternally. And I think we've got to shift that very, very quickly on its access here in Auckland. It's not just in South Auckland though. If I look at my own Taharoto Road, you don't need a bus to go along that road, you need a bus to cross it. And there was a fatality on that road in January this year with a woman attempting to cross that road and got struck by a vehicle. That road is one for your work in the very near future, but there are hundreds of roads that really need to respond to your work in the very near future. But Auckland is riddled with roads, but it is not provided for in terms of streets that provide for people, that provide for place, that provide outstanding quality, that allow people to linger and enjoy streets, let alone the freight and other movement requirements. We've got 9-lane arterials that are impermeable all over the city. And we've got 50-kilometre-an-hour slip lanes. They are dangerous. We know that the chances of surviving when you're struck at 50 kilometres an hour are negligible. You will be a fatality. It will be a fatality. Those slip lanes you will not see in these designs coming through these frameworks. We've got 900mm wide footpaths in this city. You can't pass 2 prams on 900mm, but that is the standard in South Auckland, in North Auckland, and in West Auckland. So we've got a long way to go. This is just the baseline. And I look forward to the workshop and for all of us adopting this document today. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. And declare it carried. Thank you. Thank you, George. Thank you, Chris, and Liz Halstead as well. Auckland Design Office. Liz is over there. And Auckland Design Office and Auckland Transport, thank you.
Yeah, good stuff.
Now we'll go to item 12, which is Unlock Henderson.
You really want to unlock it?
Yeah, I know.
And welcome the staff.
Toe, expect your support, Toe.
We do.
Welcome.
Lock you up.
Welcome, David Rankin.
Oh, right.
David, would you like to introduce, but I would like to introduce actually myself, Sir Bob Harvey. Sir Bob, welcome. Good to see you at our table.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Shane Henderson representing the local board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Shane, would you like to give us your feedback at the outset David, would that be
Yeah, that's fine,
amenable?
Mr Chairman, and most
And
appropriate.
then I'll,
Yep.
I'll go to David, and David can introduce staff and support and a brief presentation. But I think we'll take your feedback first, Shane.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr Chair, and we'll briefly sort of outline Henderson Massey Local Board's view. You may have noticed in the news that the long-tailed bat has returned to Henderson Creek after 15 years. So it shows that even the bats are on board with the eco centre. We're going well. So there we go. So I'll acknowledge the prior support that we've had and the great relationship we have with Panuku Development, Auckland as well. Acknowledge Sir Bob here, legend of the West to my right. And we've had, through this process, a strong engagement with mana whenua, which should be acknowledged as well. And in fact, we've taken the whole community along for the ride with us. We had it in our annual plan and reasonably strong support. So that's really, really exciting. So we're here to endorse this plan with the caveat that it should be resourced adequately. And we submit that the proceeds of sale should be reinvested into Henderson. Now, we want more housing. And we want that housing to be market attractive and integrated into a successful community with a strong vision. Through ring fencing the proceeds of sale, we would ideally like a cost neutral outcome, but with huge social and community benefit. And we, through this plan, are intending to look at parking for housing opportunities, and that's no small thing. So we've put our necks on the line here, really. And we see some great opportunities to raise that into a high level family living. We want Panuku to have flexibility through this plan so our eco centre can be a leading light that we can all be proud of in across all of Auckland. And as you will have seen from the documentation, we have a vision to return our identity, our success, our point of difference back to Henderson. Let's progress our family-centric eco centre vision, and thank you in advance for your support today.
Thank you, Shane. Would you like to you can just stay there, Shane? We might have some questions from you after David and Richard's presentation. But I think at the outset I'll invite Councillors Hills and Cooper to either move second. Which one is it?
Penny, you go, I'll second.
Second, yeah.
Move Councillor Hills, seconded Councillor Cooper, so it's on the table. David, in your hands with Richard.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. As you've noted, I'm joined with Richard, who some of you know is an alter ego in Manukau as well. And Adam Sadgrove is here from Panuku. He's the development manager that will be executing on the commercial sites. I wasn't planning to say very much, Mr Chairman, because we did have the advantage of a useful workshop with the committee a few weeks ago, and I think there was a good discussion from our perspective, and I hope those councillors who were able to be here found the same. I guess, to me, Henderson represents exactly the sort of setting that Panuku was formed to address. It's a centre with really good bones and a lot of strengths. Clearly in recent times it's had now the strategic advantage of the rail line, electrified rail line there, and it's in an international context not very far at all from the CBD. While it has strengths, like a lot of the suburban centres we're operating in, it also has a number of challenges. I mean, it was built for and in a different era, and we only need to think of things like the Westgate Centre and what that does to the retail, a lot of these traditional town centres, to know that we do have to be in the business of working with the bones that are there, but of it also actually over time repurposing a lot of these centres to give them a fresh lease of life, which logically in our view in Henderson, as the chairman of the local board said, is built around a mixed sort of housing story. And so you'll have seen that coming through clearly in the high level project plan that's that we're asking you to approve. To pick up another theme that the chairman of the board referred to, and it's a theme that we've raised with you already repeatedly, to get people to live in centres like this, support your intensification strategy, we can't imagine that that's going to happen without investment in a better living environment in town centres that weren't designed to be residential centres originally. and Henderson 2 is a good example of that. It will need money spent improving the public amenity, and at the appropriate part in the LTP process, we will be making that case in respect of Henderson and some other centres that are in this unlock category, having already raised with you the issue around the transform locations. So I think that's probably all I need to say by way of introduction, Mr. Chairman, and we will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, David. Members, just as David's reminded us, we did have a very good workshop on this, and if you go to the hub, if you want to refresh yourself, it's a confidential record for the 5th of April. You will find it there. No doubt you have already found it and read it. So we're not planning to redo the workshop here today. It's a high-level introduction. And thank you, David. Richard, is there anything further to add from your part?
No, nothing. Thank
you.
Just to thank Bob Harvey. It's really the vision of the eco-city at Waitakere, which is being kind of revealed and reshaped to be focused on Henderson. And the urban eco-centre is a goal and vision that many parts of the organisation and community now support. So
Bob, we're not letting you go without you having your say.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, kia ora. Yes, I guess that myself and 6, I think, extraordinary councils in the West work towards a common vision around Henderson. We also had that little centre called New Lynn sitting closer to Auckland, which was actually more connected to Auckland than ever Henderson was. So Henderson really was the very heart of the West. And our vision was to glue the West together around Henderson. And sir, I think we're seconds from success. And the arrival of Panuku has made that possible. There is some really extraordinary good pieces of development around the centre. You may recall that we have the cycleway also, which I think is a great gift to Auckland. It really starts at Henderson along the Opanuku stream, comes down to the motorway through some beautiful land and the creeks, the Henderson Creeks. In fact, if I had the chance to rename Henderson, I'd call it Twin Creeks, because that's what we have. And now we have these cycleways, walkways. And so in many ways, it's a magician's trick. It's all there to be unveiled. It has terrific parks. It has a centre to dream for, I think, and Panuku is that magical answer. And the land around the creeks and the town centre and the railway is ready for the 21st century. So it's ready to go, sir, councillors.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether the chair of the board will allow you to rename it from Henderson.
I was going to name it after myself, but I never had the chance.
I'd have to change my name, Chairman.
Got to wait to die first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the aptly named Shane Henderson. I think it's fantastic having you in the leadership role on this, Shane. I just want to, Mr. Chair, acknowledge the board. This is a board who, as Shane alluded to, is happy to give up some at-grade parking, a lot of at-grade parking, actually, for redevelopment. I think it's the only board so far that has actively done this because they can see and understand the big vision, and I make no apologies for raising that. I think if we are going to start transforming Auckland, we need our boards to show this kind of leadership, so I publicly want to acknowledge that. And I think, just quickly, Mr. Chair, I hope that people around this table get 100% behind this. If we are going to get people living in town centres who can completely change the way that they live and live, if they wish to, in a car-free way, you can do it here. It is the most accessible centre by bike, it's the most accessible centre by public transport, and it's the most accessible centre to some exquisite natural beauty on its front doorstep. So, at the risk of being accused of raving on and showing my Westie roots too clearly, I think this one for us is an absolute no-brainer. It's a quick win, And if I was a wealthy woman, I would be buying and investing in Henderson in a heartbeat. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Cooper and then come to Member Hinari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the team here because even though, I mean, this could be, and I hope that councillors don't think this is a legacy project, because what it is, it's a new vision based on basically standing on the shoulders of the good work that was done to actually get the infrastructure right. You know, the vision was there, but what's happened over time is that we've realised that it's not about the retail. We tried that, it's not. It's about getting people living in that town with skin in the game, that own houses with a walkable catchment to everything, which we've talked about. You know, you can walk to the primary school, you can walk to the high school, you can walk to the train station, you can mall, the library, the swimming pool, and you can even eat Lincoln Road. You can cycle up there and cycle back. And so the reality about this is that, you know, we talked about that this wasn't going to be a transform, but in reality we will need money. But I do think that it's not like we have to, you know, go to the ratepayers for that. We've got opportunities. This is one of the few unlocks where we own a significant amount of land. And in the past there's been issues about parking, and I remember a couple of councillors lost their jobs over parking at one stage in the last century. Not quite the last century, early in the century. But I think the time has come now where our train system is quiet, it's efficient, it's fast. It's going to get even faster once the Central Rail Link finishes. And I think that those are the opportunities we need to build on now and give people an opportunity to live in a great little town, and then the good retail will come. This will be a catalyst, and I think that only council can do this. In partnership with developers. I don't think if we can just rely on developers or just the retailers, it isn't going to work. We've tried it before. This is an opportunity for us to leverage what we already have with good partners and make this, you know, this is only, you know, about 15k from the city, not even that. It's closer than an awful lot of other towns. And it's just going to provide really good family living, and that's why I really commend it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Member Hinari.
Kia ora, Bob. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Kia ora.
A couple of questions, David, about any of the sale process of council's property and land. Will that go through the same RFR, Treaty of Waitangi process, blah, 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 blah?
It goes through the same process as other council land. There's no RFR as such in a council environment, but we have a process that works closely with interested mana whenua.
Okay. Second, is out of the developers, and I suppose I'm sort of half wearing my Housing New Zealand hat, so there will be collaboration with major players like Hobsonville Land Company and Housing New Zealand and along the way in terms of any housing.
Yeah, if there is interest from a Crown entity or a not-for-profit, obviously we try and see whether there's an opportunity in a town centre for that to happen. We're just in the process of about to start the long-awaited redevelopment of the Wilshire Village site, as it's known. We had lengthy discussions with HNZ over whether there was an interest in that. So yeah, that's part of how we work.
And the last sort of supplementary question on this whole development is, being a resident of Te Aratu Peninsula for the last 30-odd years, can you give some guarantee to the population out there that any development will be quicker and more efficient than the current roadworks along Te Aratu Road, which has been the bane of every bloody resident out there for just a widening of a road?
Well, you
I'm not
couldn't
sure whether
possibly comment.
it's a
It's
good
not
statement.
from
I'm not sure
Asian,
whether
is
there
it?
is an answer, but
you know where I am.
Onto you. We do. Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Hey, thank you. Just briefly, this is fantastic. I thank you all for being here. I also especially want to thank the local board. I think that the local board showing leadership on this is so important, and accepting that you have to give up some things to get some fantastic outcomes. And I hope other local boards around the city kind of bring that up. I know that if, you know, there will be challenges with other local boards, and it'll be you guys who show the way or get pushed up the list if we can't get good agreement. So I think this is really exciting for all of you sitting there. Thank you for your work on it. But it's just got to be the way forward, that we transform underutilised spaces for people and for housing and for good infrastructure. Otherwise, we are all going to be living out on the periphery of Auckland and going to have pretty terrible outcomes, especially for future generations. So I think this is one small piece of terrible.
Terrible.
Oh
Oh, I thought of Franklin.
I'm talking about God.
Of course, they live in Franklin.
Thank you. I don't interrupt everyone else when they go on and on.
Touche, brother, touche.
Slag off where other people live.
No, I'm talking about 2 to 3 hour commutes and things like that, and being split off from your family and things like that. So this is the way forward, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Panuku, who have worked very swiftly on this. Richard, you've been doing the hard yards. David, your whole team. When I look across the remit of your work at Panuku, is it Adam at the rear?
Yeah.
Adam, again, acknowledge you as well. Look, where there's been a willingness of board, political leadership. Shane, I don't just acknowledge you, but your whole board. It's very, as Councillor Hills
Refreshing.
emphasises, there are some bold calls here. There are 15 titles of land, small and quite big and significant, which you're prepared to offer up. The potential, it's not at this stage confirmed that we are disposing of those to realise greater outcomes, but I really have to acknowledge your board for having the big picture in mind, right up high, and not necessarily just holding on to nostalgia. It is a big call. It is a really big call. There's $26 million possibly. That is significant. And I do note your paragraph 38 in the report, where you've expressed an interest in reinvesting some of those proceeds, or possibly all of those proceeds, Shane. Look, that's not a decision that we can make at this committee.
Sure.
It's popped up in relationship to other unlocked categories, and I think it's for the Finance Committee to look at that policy. And I understand that we will be looking at that policy, but we need to be mindful of all of Auckland at the same time, and I know you are. So, Sir Bob, thank you for your long leadership in this area, and Twin Creeks may prevail.
Streams.
I like it. Twin Creeks, Twin Peaks.
Streams.
Hopefully it doesn't have the drama of Twin Peaks. It could have a different drama. I'm sure it does have drama. But it's certainly got atmosphere. It's on the table, moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you all. Now, members,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
thank you. I'll just go to 13. I'll move 13. It's reasonably procedural.
Yep.
1 info item, 2 memos, 7 workshops and briefings, and 2 confidential records as well. I'll have a second in.
I had a question.
Member Hinari.
I did have one question on this, Mr. Chair.
We don't have staff to support this item as noted on the agenda, but please, can we pose your question and have it answered offline?
Yeah, well, it's actually about the absence of any discussion around Three Waters, but I'm happy to take that offline. I just think it's given the traffic that I'm seeing on my inbox at the moment, it prompts me to think about some of these discussions in the Three Waters space.
On Three Waters or Healthy Waters?
That Healthy Waters is a subset of that, but look, I'll take this offline, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So it's moved and seconded by Member Hinari. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried.
We now need to move the procedural motion.
I'm happy to move.
To move the committee into confidential. I have a move in Member Narmini and seconded the Deputy Mayor. Was it over there?
No,
Sorry, Councillor Fletcher.
Wouldn't care at all.
And all those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried.
Never mind, Christine.
I want to thank the members of the public that have been here, media, blog writers.
Oh, there are media here.
Get on with it.
Thank you for your attendance.
You would have spoke up more.
If we could
Should've-
just take a
should've
short
woken up
break
earlier.